Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Special Agent Bartholomew Crane received the call at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning in March 2024. After 18 years with the Bureau's Criminal Investigative Division, he had learned that calls at this hour rarely brought good news. What he didn't expect was how the voice on the other end would change the trajectory of his career, and possibly his sanity. Agent Crane. This is Deputy Chief Martinez from the Albuquerque Police Department. We have a situation that requires federal involvement. Multiple missing persons cases with unusual circumstances. Crane sat up in his bed, immediately alert. How many missing persons are we talking about? 7 confirmed disappearances over the past 4 months. All young women between the ages of 19 and 26. All vanished without a trace from different locations across the city. That doesn't necessarily make it federal jurisdiction, Crane replied, though he was already reaching for his notepad. What makes this unusual? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Agent Crane, each of these women received identical warning messages before they disappeared. Messages that were delivered by hand to their homes, workplaces, and vehicles. The messages were all written in the same handwriting, using what appears to be red ink that our lab says contains human blood. Crane felt the familiar chill that always preceded his most disturbing cases. What did the messages say? 3 words, Agent Crane. Just 3 words written in blood, I see you. 2 hours later, Crane was on a bureau flight to Albuquerque, reviewing the case files that had been transmitted to his secure tablet. Each missing person report followed a disturbingly similar pattern. The women were all college-educated professionals living alone. They had all received between 5 and 12 of the mysterious I see you messages over a period of weeks before their disappearance. And in every case, the messages had been placed in locations that should have been impossible for an outsider to access. The first victim, Rebecca Martinez, had found messages inside her locked car, inside her office cubicle at a software company with keycard security, and even inside her apartment mailbox that required a key to open. The second victim, Jennifer Kim, had discovered messages in her gym locker, her bedroom nightstand, and taped to the inside of her apartment's front door. The level of surveillance required to place these messages suggests either law enforcement training or military experience, the case file noted. Subject demonstrates intimate knowledge of victims' daily routines and access to secured locations. But what made Crane's skin crawl was the psychological profile that had been compiled by the Albuquerque PD's behavioral analyst. Subject appears to be conducting extended observation periods lasting weeks or months before making contact. The placement of messages is designed to create maximum psychological distress while demonstrating the subject's ability to access any location at any time. This is not random predatory behavior. This is systematic psychological warfare. As the plane descended into Albuquerque, Crane reviewed crime scene photographs that showed the locations where the messages had been found. Each I see you note was written in the same distinctive handwriting, precise angular letters that looked almost military in their uniformity. But it was the placement of the messages that revealed the true scope of the stalker's capabilities. One message had been found inside a victim's car's glove compartment. A car that had been parked in a secure underground garage with a security guard on duty. The guard swore that no unauthorized personnel had entered the garage during his shift. Another message had been discovered inside a locked safety deposit box at a bank. The victim, Amanda Foster, had opened the box to retrieve her grandmother's jewelry and found the note lying on top of the jewelry case. Bank records showed that only Amanda had accessed the box in over a year, and the bank's security system required 2 keys and identification that only Amanda possessed. "This is impossible," Crane murmured to himself as he studied the evidence. "Either we're dealing with someone with supernatural abilities, or we're missing something fundamental about how these messages are being delivered." But, as he would soon discover, the truth was far more disturbing than either explanation could account for. Detective Maria Santos met Crane at the Albuquerque Police Department's main precinct with the kind of expression that suggested she had been losing sleep over this case for months. She was a compact woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the intense focus that Crane associated with investigators who had seen too much. "Agent Crane, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, leading him through the bustling precinct toward a conference room. "I have to be honest with you. This case has our entire department spooked. We're dealing with something that doesn't fit any pattern we've ever encountered." The conference room was covered with bulletin boards displaying photographs, timelines, and maps connected by different colored strings. It looked like the workspace of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Tell me about the victims," Crane said, settling into a chair facing the evidence boards. "All 7 women were highly intelligent, professionally successful, and lived alone," Santos began. "No connections between them that we can identify. Different schools, different workplaces, different social circles. The only thing they had in common was that they all lived in Albuquerque and they all received the same stalking pattern before disappearing." She handed him a timeline that showed the progression of each case. "The stalking period varies from victim to victim. Some received messages for only 3 weeks before disappearing. Others were tormented for up to 2 months. But the pattern is always the same. The messages start infrequently and then accelerate until the victim disappears." "Any witnesses to the disappearances themselves?" "That's where it gets really strange," Santos replied. "In every case, the women simply vanished from their normal environment without any sign of struggle. No evidence of forced entry, no blood, no indication of a violence. They just weren't there anymore." She showed him photographs of the various apartments and houses where the women had lived. Each location had been processed by forensics teams, but the crime scenes were disturbingly clean. Rebecca Martinez was last seen leaving her office at 6:15 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Her car was found in her apartment complex's parking lot, unlocked, with her purse and keys still inside. Her apartment door was locked, but she wasn't inside. No signs of struggle anywhere. "Security cameras?" "Here's the strange thing," Santos said, her expression darkening. "In every case, the security guards or building superintendents reported that they saw nothing unusual on the days the women disappeared. But when pressed for details, they all give vague, contradictory accounts of that time period. It's like they remember being on duty, but they can't remember any specific details about what they observed." Crane studied the crime scene photographs more carefully. The apartments and houses looked like their occupants had simply stepped out for a moment and planned to return. Food left half-eaten, TVs still on, books open to pages that would never be finished. What about physical evidence from the messages themselves? "That's where things get really disturbing," Santos said, producing an evidence bag containing one of the ICU notes. "Our forensics team confirmed that the red ink is human blood, type O negative. But here's the weird part. It's not just any blood. It's been chemically treated with preservatives that would keep it from coagulating or decomposing for weeks." Crane examined the note through the evidence bag. The handwriting was indeed precise and angular. almost like technical drafting. But there was something unsettling about the way the blood had been applied. It was too uniform, too deliberate, as if whoever had written the message had taken great care to make each letter perfect. No fingerprints, I assume? None. No DNA other than the blood used for ink, no fibers, no trace evidence of any kind. But Agent Crane, there's something else that's been bothering me about these messages. Santos showed him photographs of several different notes side by side. Look at the handwriting carefully. Each note was supposedly written weeks apart, but the handwriting is absolutely identical. Not just similar, identical. The pressure, the spacing, the formation of each letter, it's like they were all written by the same person at the same time. Maybe they were. The perpetrator could have prepared multiple messages in advance. That's what we thought initially, but we had a handwriting expert examine them. She said that achieving this level of consistency across multiple writing sessions would require either exceptional skill or... Santos paused, looking uncomfortable. Or what? Or some kind of mechanical assistance, like the letters were traced or copied using a template. Crane felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of someone methodically preparing blood-written messages using templates suggested a level of premeditation and attention to detail that was deeply disturbing. Detective Santos, I'd like to visit the crime scenes personally. Sometimes seeing the locations where the messages were placed can provide insights that photographs can't convey. Of course. But Agent Crane, I should warn you, some of the places where these messages were found, they're going to challenge everything you think you know about what's physically possible. The first location Santos took Crane to was Rebecca Martinez's apartment complex, a modern 3-story building with controlled access and what appeared to be reasonable security measures. The building manager, a nervous man named Frank Delgado, met them in the lobby with a large ring of keys and an expression that suggested he would rather be anywhere else. "Agent, I've been managing this building for 8 years," Delgado said as he led them toward the elevator. "I know every tenant, every maintenance worker, every delivery person who comes through here. I'm telling you, there's no way anyone unauthorized could have gotten into Rebecca's apartment." Rebecca's apartment was on the 2nd floor, and as they walked down the carpeted hallway, Crane noticed that it was the kind of building where any unusual activity would be easily observed by neighbors. The walls were thin enough that conversations could be heard through them, and the hallway had good lighting and clear sight lines. "This is Rebecca's apartment," Delgado said, unlocking the door with a key from his ring. The police processed it thoroughly, but they didn't find any evidence of forced entry. The apartment was small but well-maintained. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a combined living room and kitchen, and a single balcony that faced the parking lot. Crane examined the windows and the balcony door, looking for any indication of how someone might have gained entry. The messages were found in multiple locations throughout the apartment, Santos said, consulting her notes. 1 in the bedroom closet, 1 in the kitchen cabinet above the refrigerator, and 1 in the bathroom medicine cabinet. "Show me the bedroom closet," Crane said. The bedroom was cramped but organized. The closet was a standard sliding door unit filled with clothes, shoes, and storage boxes. Santos showed him a photograph of where the message had been found, placed on top of a shoebox on the highest shelf, in a location that would require someone to move other items to access it. Rebecca was only 5'3", Santos noted. She would have needed a chair or stepladder to reach that shelf. But there was no chair in the bedroom and no indication that anything had been moved to provide access. Crane examined the closet carefully. The shelf was indeed high enough that even he, at 6 feet tall, would have difficulty reaching it comfortably. Could someone have entered through the bedroom window? 2nd floor, and the window faces a busy street with good lighting. Plus, the window was locked from the inside when we found the apartment empty. They moved to the kitchen, where another message had been found in a cabinet above the refrigerator. This location was even more puzzling. The cabinet was narrow and filled with dishes that would have to be moved carefully to avoid making noise. The neighbors on both sides were home the evening Rebecca disappeared, Santos said. They reported hearing normal apartment sounds, TV, footsteps, kitchen noises, until about 6:30 p.m. After that, silence, but no one heard anything that sounded like an intruder. The bathroom medicine cabinet was the most disturbing location of all. It was a small, mirrored cabinet recessed into the wall above the sink. The message had been found tucked behind prescription bottles in a way that would require someone to carefully remove and replace the bottles without disturbing their arrangement. "Agent Crane," Delgado said quietly, "I need to tell you something that I haven't told the police because I was afraid they'd think I was crazy." Crane turned to face the building manager. "What is it, Mr. Delgado?" 3 days before Rebecca disappeared, I was doing routine maintenance on the apartment above hers. I was fixing a leaky pipe in the bathroom, and I could hear someone moving around in Rebecca's apartment below. But I knew Rebecca was at work because I had seen her leave that morning. "Did you investigate?" "I went down and knocked on her door. No answer. I used my master key to check inside, thinking maybe she had come home sick or something. But the apartment was empty. Nobody there." Santos frowned. "You didn't mention this in your original statement." "Because 15 minutes later, I saw Rebecca coming home from work. She had been at her office all day. I confirmed it with her later. But I know what I heard. Someone was in that apartment while she was gone." Crane felt the familiar chill that indicated a case was about to become much more complicated. "Mr. Delgado, in your 8 years managing this building, how many master keys have been issued?" "Just mine. The building owner has one, but he lives in Denver and hasn't been here in over a year." "Any keys ever lost or stolen?" "Never. I keep mine on me at all times." As they prepared to leave Rebecca's apartment, Crane noticed something that the crime scene photographers had documented, but that took on new significance in light of Delgado's story. There was a thin layer of dust on most of the furniture and surfaces, the kind of dust that accumulates when someone has been away for a few days. But there were clean spots on several surfaces, as if someone had been moving objects around and wiping away dust prints. "Detective Santos, how long was Rebecca's apartment vacant before you processed it as a crime scene?" "We entered it the day after she was reported missing, so the apartment had been empty for maybe 18 hours. This level of dust accumulation suggests the apartment had been empty for several days, not 18 hours. Santos examined the dust patterns more carefully. "You're right, but Rebecca's co-workers confirmed that she came to work every day the week she disappeared. Her neighbors saw her coming and going normally." "Then who was living in her apartment?" Crane asked. But even as he spoke, he realized that the question might be more disturbing than the answer. The next crime scene was Jennifer Kim's house, a small, single-story home in a quiet residential neighborhood where houses were close together, and neighbors generally kept an eye on each other's properties. Jennifer had been a freelance graphic designer who worked from home, which made her disappearance even more puzzling because her daily routine was so predictable. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the elderly neighbor who lived directly across the street, met them on Jennifer's front porch with the kind of detailed observations that Crane had learned to value in missing persons cases. "Agent, I've lived in this neighborhood for 32 years, Mrs. Patterson said, adjusting her glasses as she consulted a small notebook. "I know, when people come and go, what cars belong here and what doesn't fit the normal pattern. Did you notice anything unusual in the days before Jennifer disappeared?" "That's just it. I noticed things that should have been normal, but weren't. For 3 weeks before Jennifer went missing, I saw her leave for her morning run every day at 7 a.m., just like always. But I also saw her leave for her morning run at 7 a.m. on days when I had seen her come home after dark the night before. Santos frowned. I'm not sure I understand. I saw Jennifer leave for runs on mornings when she should have been exhausted from staying out late the night before. And these weren't quick runs. She'd be gone for over an hour, which was her normal routine. But when someone stays out until midnight or later, they don't usually get up at 7 a.m. for a long run. Crane felt the same unsettling sensation he had experienced at Rebecca's apartment. Mrs. Patterson, are you certain you were seeing Jennifer during these morning runs? Well, of course Mrs. Patterson paused, looking uncertain for the first time. I mean, she was wearing Jennifer's running clothes, using Jennifer's route, running at Jennifer's pace. But now that you mention it, I never got a clear look at her face during those morning runs. Why not? She was wearing a baseball cap pulled down low and sunglasses, which was strange, because Jennifer never wore sunglasses on her morning runs. She always said the early morning light helped her wake up. They entered Jennifer's house through the front door, which showed no signs of forced entry. The interior was meticulously organized, the home of someone who worked from home and needed everything in its place to maintain productivity. The messages were found in 3 locations, Santos said, consulting her case notes. 1 in the home office desk drawer, 1 in the bedroom jewelry box, and 1 in the kitchen pantry behind the cereal boxes. The home office was set up with professional design equipment and carefully organized supplies. The desk drawer where the message had been found was filled with business cards, receipts, and other work-related items that would need to be moved aside to place a note. Jennifer was extremely particular about her workspace, Santos noted. Her sister said she could tell if anything had been moved, even slightly. But when we processed the scene, everything was exactly where Jennifer would have left it. The bedroom jewelry box was even more puzzling. It was a small, locked wooden box that Jennifer kept on her dresser. The key was hidden in a location that only Jennifer knew about, taped to the underside of a drawer in her nightstand. How did you know where to find the key? Crane asked. Jennifer's sister told us where to look. Jennifer had shown her the hiding place in case of emergency. So, only Jennifer and her sister knew where the key was hidden. Apparently. And the sister lives in Phoenix. She hasn't been to Albuquerque in 6 months. Crane examined the jewelry box carefully. It was the kind of antique piece that would be damaged if someone tried to force it open, but it showed no signs of tampering. The lock mechanism worked smoothly and the hinges were properly aligned. The kitchen pantry presented the most disturbing evidence yet. The message had been found tucked behind a row of cereal boxes on a high shelf. But accessing that location would require someone to remove at least 3 boxes, place the note, and then carefully replace the boxes in exactly the same positions. Mrs. Patterson, from your window across the street, can you see into Jennifer's kitchen? Oh, yes, very clearly. Jennifer never closed her kitchen curtains during the day because she liked the natural light while she was cooking. Did you ever observe anyone in Jennifer's kitchen when she wasn't home? Mrs. Patterson hesitated, looking uncomfortable. Agent, I'm going to tell you something that I haven't told the police because I was afraid they'd think I was a nosy old woman who was seeing things. Please. Anything you observed could be important. 3 times in the 2 weeks before Jennifer disappeared, I saw someone moving around in her kitchen in the middle of the afternoon. But Jennifer's car wasn't in the driveway, and I had seen her leave that morning for what she called her client meetings downtown. Did you get a look at who was in the kitchen? That's the strange part. From a distance, it looked like Jennifer. Same height, same build, same way of moving around the kitchen. But it was someone who knew where Jennifer kept everything. They opened the right cabinets, used the right appliances, moved around the space like they lived there. But you don't think it was Jennifer? I know it wasn't Jennifer because 20 minutes after I saw someone in her kitchen, I saw Jennifer's car pull into the driveway and Jennifer get out with her purse and shopping bags. Crane exchanged a look with Santos. They were dealing with something that went far beyond normal stalking behavior. Someone was systematically infiltrating these women's lives, learning their routines, accessing their homes, and apparently impersonating them for extended periods. Mrs. Patterson, did you ever consider calling the police about these observations? I did call once, after the second time I saw someone in Jennifer's kitchen when she wasn't home. But when the officer arrived, Jennifer was there and everything seemed normal. The officer probably thought I was a confused old woman. As they prepared to leave Jennifer's house, Crane noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the kitchen counter there was a small pile of mail that included several bills and magazines. The postmark showed that the mail had been delivered over a period of several days after Jennifer's disappearance. Detective Santos, who's been collecting Jennifer's mail? No one. The Postal Service was instructed to hold her mail after she was reported missing. But the pile of mail on the counter suggested that someone had been living in Jennifer's house, accepting deliveries and maintaining the appearance of normal occupancy, even after she had disappeared. Someone's been living here, Crane realized. Someone who knows Jennifer's routines well, enough to fool the neighbors and the Postal Service. But that's impossible, Santos replied. We've had this house under surveillance since Jennifer was reported missing. Have you? Or have you been watching someone who looks enough like Jennifer to pass casual observation? The possibility that they had been unknowingly surveilling Jennifer's impersonator sent a chill through both investigators. If Crane was right, it meant that whoever had taken Jennifer was still using her house, her identity, and her daily routine to maintain the illusion that nothing had happened. Back at the police station, Crane and Santos spread out all the evidence from the 7 missing persons cases across a large conference table. When viewed together, the pattern that emerged was more disturbing than either investigator had initially realized. Look at the timeline, Crane said, arranging the case files in chronological order. The disappearances aren't random. They're spaced exactly 6 weeks apart, and they all occurred on Tuesday evenings between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. Santos studied the timeline more carefully. You're right. Rebecca Martinez disappeared on Tuesday, January 16th. Jennifer Kim disappeared on Tuesday, February 27th. Amanda Foster disappeared on Tuesday, April 9th. Someone is operating on a schedule, Crane observed. This level of precision suggests military or law enforcement training. They began looking for other patterns in the evidence. All 7 victims were women living alone. All were between the ages of 19 and 26. All were college-educated professionals who worked regular schedules. All had been receiving the blood-written "I see you" messages for weeks before their disappearances. But there was another pattern that was even more disturbing. In each case, neighbors and co-workers had reported seeing the missing women after their disappearances. But these sightings were always from a distance or under circumstances where facial features couldn't be clearly observed. Agent Crane, what if these women aren't missing? Santos asked quietly. What do you mean? What if they're being held somewhere nearby and someone is using them to maintain the illusion that they're still living their normal lives? The possibility that the missing women were being forced to participate in some kind of elaborate deception was horrifying. It would explain how their imposters knew their routines, their preferences, and their habits well enough to fool casual observers. But why? Crane asked. What would be the purpose of such an elaborate charade? Before Santos could answer, her phone rang. She listened for a moment, her expression growing increasingly grim. "That was dispatch," she said after hanging up. "We have another one. 23-year-old Rachel Morrison disappeared from her apartment last night. Tuesday evening, between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. "Let me guess," Crane said. She had been receiving blood-written messages for the past few weeks. 6 messages over 3 weeks, all placed in locations that should have been impossible to access. As they prepared to leave for the new crime scene, Crane noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. On the evidence board, Santos had pinned up photographs of all 7 missing women. When viewed together, there was an unmistakable similarity between them. All 7 women had the same basic physical characteristics: height, weight, hair color, and facial structure. They weren't identical, but they were similar enough that from a distance, or under poor lighting conditions, they could easily be mistaken for each other. "Detective Santos, look at these photographs. Do you see what I see?" Santos examined the photos more carefully. Oh my God, they all look like they could be sisters. Or like they were selected specifically because of their physical similarity to each other. The implications were staggering. If the perpetrator was choosing victims based on their physical resemblance to each other, it suggested a level of planning and purpose that went far beyond random predatory behavior. "Agent Crane, what if someone is building a collection? What if these women are being held somewhere and forced to play specific roles?" "Like what kind of roles?" "I don't know, but think about it. If you had 7 women who looked similar enough to be mistaken for each other, and you could control their behavior through psychological conditioning or threats, you could use them for almost anything." As they drove toward Rachel Morrison's apartment, Crane found himself considering possibilities that were too disturbing to voice. Someone was collecting women who looked alike, conducting extended psychological warfare against them, and then using them to maintain elaborate deceptions. But the most terrifying possibility was that the 7 women they knew about might not be the only victims. If someone was operating with this level of sophistication and planning, there could be similar operations in other cities, other states, other countries. "Detective Santos, I need you to contact the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. I want to see if there are similar cases in other jurisdictions. Missing women who received threatening messages before disappearing, especially women who physically resemble our victims." "You think this is bigger than Albuquerque?" "I think we might be looking at the tip of an iceberg." Rachel Morrison's apartment was located in a complex similar to Rebecca Martinez's, modern, secure, and filled with young professionals who minded their own business. But unlike the previous crime scenes, this one was fresh enough that Crane hoped they might find evidence that had been missed in the older cases. The apartment manager, a competent-looking woman named Sarah Chen, met them in the parking lot with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Officers, I've never had anything like this happen in one of my buildings," she said, leading them toward the entrance. "Rachel was one of our most reliable tenants, always paid rent on time, never caused any problems, very quiet and respectful." "When was the last time you saw her?" Crane asked. "Yesterday morning around 8 a.m. She was leaving for work, same as always. She worked at the marketing firm downtown and kept very regular hours." "Any unusual activity in the building lately? Maintenance workers, delivery people, anyone who might have had access to the building?" "That's just it. There hasn't been anyone unusual. Our maintenance is handled by a contracted company that's been working with us for 5 years. All our employees are background checked and bonded." Rachel's apartment was on the 3rd floor, and as they climbed the stairs, Crane noticed that the building's layout would make it very difficult for someone to access apartments without being observed by other tenants. The stairwells were well lit, and the hallways had good acoustics that would carry the sound of footsteps or conversation. "This is Rachel's apartment," Chen said, unlocking the door with her master key. "The police asked me not to let anyone inside until you arrived." The apartment was similar to Rebecca's and Jennifer's, small, well-organized, and showing no signs of struggle or forced entry. But there was something different about this crime scene that immediately caught Crane's attention. Detective Santos looked at the living room. The furniture had been rearranged slightly, not dramatically, but enough to suggest that someone had been using the space for an extended period. A chair had been moved closer to the window, providing a better view of the street. The coffee table had been repositioned to accommodate someone sitting in the relocated chair. "Someone's been living here," Santos observed. "Not just living here," Crane corrected. "Someone's been watching from here." The view from the repositioned chair provided a clear line of sight to the building's parking lot and the main entrance. Anyone sitting in that chair could observe the comings and goings of all the building's residents. "Ms. Chen, how long has Rachel been a tenant here?" "About 8 months. She moved in last summer when she started her job." "Any complaints from neighbors about noise or unusual activity from her apartment?" "None at all. Rachel was very quiet. In fact, some of the neighbors commented that they hardly ever heard her moving around, even though the walls are pretty thin." Crane examined the kitchen, looking for the kind of evidence they had found at the other crime scenes. Sure enough, there was a blood-written "I see you" message tucked behind cereal boxes in the pantry. But there was also something else. Fresh food in the refrigerator that was too much for one person. "Detective Santos, look at this grocery receipt on the counter." The receipt was dated 2 days ago and showed purchases that seemed excessive for a single person living alone. Multiple gallons of milk, several loaves of bread, large quantities of lunch meat, and other perishables. Either Rachel was planning to feed a lot of people, or someone else has been doing the grocery shopping, Santos observed. In the bedroom, they found evidence that confirmed their worst suspicions. The closet contained 2 sets of clothes in the same size, but in slightly different styles, as if 2 different people with similar taste were sharing the space. "Agent Crane, look at this," Santos called from the bathroom. The medicine cabinet contained 2 toothbrushes, 2 different brands of shampoo, and prescription bottles for 2 different people. One set belonged to Rachel Morrison. The other set belonged to Rebecca Martinez, the first woman who had disappeared 4 months earlier. Rebecca's been living here, Crane realized. Someone has been forcing her to share Rachel's apartment. But why? What's the purpose of keeping them together? Before Crane could answer, they heard a sound from the apartment's front door. The distinctive click of a key turning in the lock. Crane and Santos immediately drew their weapons and positioned themselves on either side of the hallway leading to the front door. Chen ducked behind the kitchen counter, her face pale with terror. The front door opened slowly, and they could hear footsteps in the entryway. Crane counted 3 distinct sets of footsteps. Too many to be Rachel returning home alone. "Federal agents," Crane called out. "Show yourself with your hands visible." The footsteps stopped. Then, to Crane's amazement, a familiar voice called back. "Officers? Is everything okay? This is Rachel Morrison. I live here." A young woman appeared in the hallway, and she was indeed Rachel Morrison, matching the photograph from the missing person report exactly. She was dressed in business attire and carrying a purse and keys, looking like someone who had just returned from work. But standing behind her were 2 other young women who matched the physical descriptions of Rebecca Martinez and Jennifer Kim. "Don't move!" Santos shouted. "Keep your hands where we can see them." The 3 women stood perfectly still, their hands raised, their expressions showing no fear or surprise. They looked calm, almost serene, as if being held at gunpoint by federal agents was a perfectly normal part of their day. "My name is Rachel Morrison," the first woman said in a steady, emotionless voice. I live in apartment 3B. These are my roommates, Rebecca and Jennifer. We were just returning from work." But there was something wrong with the way she spoke. Her voice was flat and mechanical, like someone reciting lines they had memorized, and her eyes had the same vacant expression that Crane had seen in victims of severe psychological trauma. "Ma'am, you've been reported missing," Crane said carefully. "Your family and friends have been looking for you." "I haven't been missing," Rachel replied in the same monotone voice. "I've been living here with my roommates. We go to work every day and come home every evening. We're very happy." Crane looked at the other two women, recognizing Rebecca Martinez and Jennifer Kim from their missing person photographs. But like Rachel, they showed no recognition, no relief at being found, no reaction to being rescued. "Rebecca, do you remember your sister Maria?" Crane asked. "She's been worried about you." Rebecca looked at him with the same vacant expression. "I don't know anyone named Maria. My roommates are Rachel and Jennifer. We live together and take care of each other." As Crane studied the three women more carefully, he realized that they were all wearing identical clothes. Not the same style, but literally identical outfits, as if they were uniforms. Their hair was styled identically. Their makeup was applied identically. Even their posture and facial expressions were eerily similar. "Agent Crane," Santos whispered, "something's very wrong here." But before Crane could respond, he heard more footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment. Someone else was coming. The man who appeared in the doorway was nothing like what Crane had expected. Instead of the dangerous predator he had been imagining, he found himself facing a mild-mannered man in his 50s wearing a cardigan sweater and carrying a grocery bag. "Good evening, girls," the man said to the three women, completely ignoring the federal agents pointing weapons at him. "I brought the items you requested for dinner tonight." "Thank you, Mr. Henley," all three women said in unison, their voices perfectly synchronized. The man, Mr. Henley, finally acknowledged Crane and Santos, looking at them with the kind of mild confusion that suggested he found their presence surprising, but not particularly threatening. "I'm sorry, officers, I wasn't expecting visitors. Is there some kind of problem?" "Sir, keep your hands visible and step into the room slowly," Crane ordered. Mr. Henley complied with the calm compliance of someone accustomed to following instructions. He was tall and thin, with graying hair and the soft features of someone who had spent his life in academic or professional settings rather than physical labor. "Sir, what is your relationship to these women?" Santos asked. "I'm their caretaker," Mr. Henley replied matter-of-factly. "I help them maintain their daily routines and ensure they have everything they need for comfortable living. These women have been reported missing by their families. They're victims of kidnapping." Mr. Henley looked genuinely puzzled. "I think there's been some misunderstanding, officer. These women live here voluntarily. They choose to share living arrangements because they find it more economical and socially satisfying than living alone." Crane studied Mr. Henley more carefully. There was something unsettling about his calm demeanor and the way he spoke about the women as if they were his responsibility rather than independent adults. "Mr. Henley, I'm going to need to see some identification," Crane said. "Of course." Henley reached slowly into his wallet and produced a driver's license. "My name is Dr. Marcus Henley. I'm a retired professor of psychology from the University of New Mexico." The identification looked legitimate, but Crane noticed that the address listed was the same apartment complex where they currently stood. According to the license, Dr. Henley lived in apartment 1A, directly below Rachel's unit. "Dr. Henley, how long have you been caring for these women?" "About 6 months. They each came to me seeking help with various psychological difficulties: anxiety, depression, social adjustment issues. I've been providing therapeutic support to help them develop healthier living patterns. Without their family's knowledge, patient confidentiality is sacred in therapeutic relationships, Henley replied. These women are adults who have the right to make their own choices about their living situations and their relationships with family members. Santos stepped closer to the three women, studying their expressions. "Ma'am," she said to Rebecca, "do you remember choosing to receive therapy from Dr. Henley?" Rebecca looked at Santos with the same vacant expression. "Doctor, Henley helps us be better versions of ourselves. We were confused and unhappy before we came to live here. Now we understand our purpose." "What purpose is that?" "To take care of each other and follow Dr. Henley's guidance. He helps us make good decisions." Crane felt his skin crawl at the robotic way Rebecca spoke. These women weren't living here voluntarily. They had been systematically brainwashed into believing that their captivity was therapeutic treatment. "Dr. Henley, I'm placing you under arrest for kidnapping," Crane announced. "I think you'll find that's not legally possible," Henley replied calmly. "These women are here of their own free will. They'll confirm that they chose to participate in my therapeutic program." As if responding to a cue, all three women nodded in unison. "We chose to be here," Rachel said. "Dr. Henley saved us from our old lives. We're grateful for his help." "We want to stay here," Rebecca added. "This is our home now." "Please don't separate us from Dr. Henley," Jennifer said. "He takes good care of us." Crane realized that they were facing a situation where the victims had been so thoroughly conditioned that they would actively resist being rescued. Henley had somehow convinced them that their captivity was beneficial treatment. "Dr. Henley, you're going to come with us for questioning," Santos said. "Of course. But I should mention that disrupting these women's therapeutic routine could cause serious psychological regression. They've made remarkable progress, but they're still quite fragile." As if to demonstrate his point, the three women immediately began showing signs of distress when Henley was handcuffed. They huddled together, their calm expressions replaced by anxiety and confusion. "Dr. Henley," Rachel called out. "Where are they taking you? We need you here." "It's all right, girls," Henley said soothingly. "Remember your breathing exercises. Support each other. I'll be back soon." Even in handcuffs being arrested for kidnapping, Dr. Marcus Henley maintained complete control over his victims. They looked to him for reassurance and guidance, unable to function independently without his direction. "Agent Crane," Santos whispered, "we're going to need psychiatric evaluation for all three women. They're going to need extensive deprogramming therapy." But as they prepared to leave the apartment, Crane noticed something that made him question everything they thought they understood about the case. On the coffee table, partially hidden under some magazines, was a notebook filled with what appeared to be detailed psychological profiles. The notebook contained extensive information about dozens of young women: their names, addresses, daily routines, psychological vulnerabilities, and what appeared to be assessments of their suitability for therapeutic intervention. "Dr. Henley," Crane said, holding up the notebook, "how many other women are you currently treating?" For the first time, Henley's calm demeanor showed a crack. "That's confidential patient information, Agent. I'm not at liberty to discuss other cases." But the notebook suggested that Rebecca, Jennifer, and Rachel were not Henley's only victims. According to the profiles, he had been studying potential targets across multiple states for years. "Detective Santos, we need to contact every law enforcement agency in the Southwest. If Dr. Henley is running similar operations in other locations, there could be dozens of missing women." As they escorted Henley from the building, Crane caught sight of him looking back at the three women who were watching from the apartment window. Even from a distance, Crane could see that Henley was mouthing words to them, probably instructions for what to do while he was gone. The most disturbing realization was that even if they successfully prosecuted Henley for kidnapping, the three women might never fully recover from whatever psychological conditioning he had subjected them to. They had been transformed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Living dolls who existed only to fulfill their captor's vision of perfect compliance. The FBI field office in Albuquerque had set up a secure interrogation room where Dr. Marcus Henley sat across from Crane and Santos with the calm composure of someone attending a faculty meeting rather than facing federal kidnapping charges. He had declined the offer of an attorney, claiming that he had nothing to hide and looked forward to explaining his therapeutic methods to law enforcement. Dr. Henley, Crane began, let's start with the basics. How did you first encounter Rebecca Martinez? Rebecca came to me through a referral, Henley replied. She was struggling with anxiety and depression related to her living situation. Young women today face tremendous pressure to maintain independence while lacking the emotional maturity to handle complex social relationships. Who referred her to you? I maintain a practice that operates largely through word-of-mouth referrals. Many of my patients prefer discretion in their therapeutic relationships. Santos consulted her notes. Dr. Henley, according to our investigation, Rebecca never sought psychological treatment. Her family and friends describe her as mentally healthy and emotionally stable. Families often don't recognize the signs of psychological distress, Henley said with the patronizing tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. Young women are particularly skilled at hiding their emotional difficulties from people who might judge or criticize them. What about the blood-written messages? Crane asked. How do those fit into your therapeutic approach? For the first time, Henley's expression showed a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction. The messages serve multiple therapeutic purposes. They help patients recognize that they're being observed and cared for, even when they feel alone and isolated. They also create a sense of anticipation that prepares them for positive change in their lives. You terrorize these women with threatening messages written in blood. I helped them understand that someone was paying attention to their well-being. The blood serves as a powerful symbol of life and transformation. Many therapeutic traditions use symbolic elements to facilitate psychological change. Crane leaned forward, studying Henley's face for any sign of deception or mental illness. But the man appeared to genuinely believe that his actions were justified and beneficial. Dr. Henley, how did you gain access to secured locations like Rebecca's locked apartment and Jennifer's home? Patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing specific therapeutic techniques in detail. But I can tell you that trust-building exercises often involve demonstrating care and attention in ways that patients find meaningful. You broke into their homes. I entered spaces where I had been invited to provide therapeutic support. The legal concept of invitation can be quite complex when it comes to therapeutic relationships. Santos showed him photographs of the crime scenes. Dr. Henley. These women were terrorized. They experienced extreme anxiety, sleep deprivation, and paranoia as a result of your actions. Therapeutic transformation often involves temporary discomfort, Henley replied. Consider surgical procedures. They cause short-term pain in order to achieve long-term healing. Psychological surgery operates on similar principles. Psychological surgery? The systematic removal of harmful thought patterns, destructive behaviors, and limiting beliefs that prevent individuals from reaching their full potential. It's a more advanced form of cognitive behavioral therapy. Crane felt a chill run down his spine. Henley was describing the systematic destruction of personality and identity as if it were a legitimate medical procedure. Dr. Henley, what happened to the other missing women? Amanda Foster, Sarah Thompson, Lisa Rodriguez, and Maria Valdez? Those patients have progressed to more advanced stages of treatment. They're participating in residential therapeutic programs at specialized facilities. What facilities? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specific locations of treatment centers. Patient privacy is paramount in therapeutic relationships. Santos leaned back in her chair, studying Henley with the expression of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. Dr. Henley, in your professional opinion, what was wrong with these women that required such intensive therapeutic intervention? Modern society creates tremendous psychological stress for young women, Henley replied, warming to what was apparently a favorite topic. They're encouraged to pursue independence and career success while being denied the social support structures that would help them thrive. The result is epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, and relationship dysfunction. So, you decided to fix them? I developed therapeutic interventions designed to help them find peace, purpose, and genuine happiness. The women in my care are no longer burdened by the unrealistic expectations and toxic social pressures that were making them miserable. By erasing their personalities and turning them into compliant robots. By helping them discover their authentic selves, the selves that existed before society corrupted them with harmful beliefs and expectations. Crane realized that they were dealing with someone who had constructed an elaborate philosophical justification for systematic psychological abuse. In Henley's mind, he was a healer rather than a predator. Dr. Henley, how many women are currently in your care? That information is confidential. How many facilities are you operating? I'm not at liberty to discuss operational details. How long have you been conducting these therapeutic programs? For the first time, Henley hesitated before answering. I've been refining my therapeutic approaches for many years. The current residential programs represent the culmination of decades of research and clinical experience. Decades? Effective therapeutic intervention requires extensive research and development. I've been studying optimal approaches to personality reconstruction since the 1980s. The implication that Henley had been kidnapping and brainwashing women for over 40 years was staggering. If he was telling the truth, there could be hundreds of victims across multiple decades. Dr. Henley, where did you develop these therapeutic techniques? I conducted extensive research during my academic career, including collaboration with colleagues at various institutions. The theoretical foundations draw from multiple disciplines: psychology, neuroscience, behavioral conditioning, and social psychology. Did any of this research involve government funding or military applications? Henley's calm demeanor flickered again. I'm not at liberty to discuss the funding sources for various research projects. Crane felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to come together. If Henley had developed his techniques through government-funded research, it would explain the sophistication of his methods and his apparent connections to institutional resources. Dr. Henley, I'm going to ask you one more time. Where are the other missing women? They're safe and happy in residential treatment facilities where they're receiving the care they need to maintain their psychological progress. And if we don't find them? For the first time, Henley smiled. A cold, satisfied expression that revealed the predator beneath the therapeutic facade. Agent Crane, those women have been transformed into their authentic selves. Even if you could locate them, they would choose to remain in treatment rather than return to the psychological dysfunction of their previous lives. The search for Dr. Henley's other facilities began with a comprehensive review of his financial records, property holdings, and professional associations. What they discovered painted a picture of a man who had been systematically building an infrastructure for large-scale psychological experimentation over the course of several decades. Agent Prudence Blackthorne had arrived from Quantico to coordinate the multi-state investigation that was expanding rapidly as more potential victims were identified. She set up a command center at the Albuquerque field office and began coordinating with law enforcement agencies across the Southwest. Agent Crane, we've identified property holdings in 4 states, Blackthorne reported. Dr. Henley owns or has long-term leases on facilities in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. All of them are registered as residential treatment centers or therapeutic communities. How many facilities total? 12 confirmed locations, but based on the financial records, there may be additional properties held under corporate entities that we haven't identified yet. The scale of Henley's operation was staggering. Each facility appeared to be designed to house between 6 and 12 women, suggesting that he could be holding dozens of victims simultaneously. What about the women who are currently with Henley in Albuquerque? Crane asked. They've been transferred to the psychiatric ward at Presbyterian Hospital for evaluation and treatment, but Agent Crane, the preliminary assessments are disturbing. Blackthorne showed him reports from the psychiatrists who had examined Rebecca, Jennifer, and Rachel. All 3 women show signs of systematic psychological conditioning that may have caused permanent personality changes. They're resistant to treatment and continue to express loyalty to Dr. Henley. Are they capable of providing information about the other facilities? That's the problem. Their conditioning includes what appears to be programmed amnesia about anything that might compromise Henley's operation. They remember their daily routines and their therapeutic activities, but they have no memory of how they arrived at his facility or what happened to the other missing women. Crane felt the familiar frustration of a case where the victims had been so thoroughly manipulated that they couldn't help with their own rescue. Agent Blackthorne, what about Dr. Henley's academic background? Have we been able to verify his credentials and research history? That's where things get really interesting, Blackthorne replied. Dr. Marcus Henley was indeed a professor of psychology at the University of New Mexico from 1987 to 2019. But his research was funded by a series of grants from organizations with connections to defense contractors and intelligence agencies. She showed him a complex organizational chart that traced Henley's funding sources through a maze of government contracts and private research institutions. From 1992 to 2007, Henley received funding from something called the Advanced Behavioral Research Institute, which was later revealed to be a front organization for classified military research into psychological conditioning and behavioral modification. Mind control research? Essentially, yes, the kind of research that was supposedly shut down after the Church Committee investigations in the 1970s, but apparently continued under different names and funding structures. The realization that Henley had been developing his techniques using taxpayer funding for military applications made Crane feel sick. Somewhere in the government bureaucracy, officials had been funding research that was now being used to systematically destroy the lives of innocent women. Agent Blackthorne, what's our approach for searching the other facilities? Coordinated, simultaneous raids at all 12 locations. We are working with local law enforcement in each state to ensure we have sufficient personnel and resources. When? Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Mountain Time. All teams will execute search warrants simultaneously to prevent Henley's associates from destroying evidence or moving victims. As they prepared for the raids, Crane couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial about Henley's operation. The scale of the facilities, the sophisticated psychological conditioning, and the apparent government connection suggested that this was more than one man's twisted therapeutic program. Agent Blackthorne, do we have any intelligence about Henley's associates? Someone with his level of operation couldn't be working alone. That's what worries me most about this case, Blackthorne replied. We haven't identified any clear associates or accomplices. Either Dr. Henley is an organizational genius who can manage a 12-facility operation by himself, or there are other people involved who are very good at staying invisible. What about the financial records? Large-scale operations require significant funding. The facilities are self-supporting through a combination of government contracts, private donations, and what appears to be income from placing graduates of the program in employment situations. Employment situations. We're still investigating, but it appears that women who complete Henley's conditioning program are placed in positions where their compliance and psychological conditioning would be valuable. Domestic workers for wealthy families, assistants to business executives, companions for elderly clients. The possibility that Henley had been essentially manufacturing psychologically conditioned servants for wealthy clients added another layer of horror to an already disturbing case. Agent Crane, Blackthorne continued, there's something else you need to know about tomorrow's raids. We're expecting resistance. What kind of resistance? According to the financial records, several of the facilities employ security personnel with military backgrounds. We're treating these as potentially hostile environments rather than simple rescue operations. As Crane prepared for what could be the most dangerous raid of his career, he found himself wondering how many other Dr. Henleys were operating similar programs in other parts of the country. If government-funded research had produced techniques this effective for psychological conditioning, it was possible that multiple organizations were using similar methods for different purposes. The most disturbing thought was that some of these programs might still be receiving government funding, operating under the cover of legitimate research or therapeutic treatment. At exactly 6 a.m. Mountain Time, FBI tactical teams simultaneously executed search warrants at all 12 of Dr. Henley's facilities across 4 states. Agent Crane led the team that raided the largest facility, a compound in the mountains outside Santa Fe that was registered as the Serenity Wellness Institute. The facility looked like an upscale retreat center from the outside, modern buildings nestled among pine trees, with carefully landscaped grounds and a welcoming entrance sign. But as the tactical team approached, they encountered the first sign that this was something more sinister than a therapeutic community. Armed security at the main gate, reported the team leader through Crane's earpiece. 2 subjects with military-style weapons. Rules of engagement? Treat as hostile until proven otherwise. We're expecting organized resistance. The breach of the main gate went smoothly. The security guards surrendered without firing a shot when faced with overwhelming tactical superiority. But as the teams moved through the facility, they discovered a complex that was far more sophisticated than anything they had expected. Agent Crane, you need to see this, called Agent Rodriguez from the main building. The interior of the facility looked like a cross between a luxury hotel and a medical research center. The common areas were decorated with expensive furniture and artwork, creating an atmosphere of comfortable prosperity. But behind the elegant facade were rooms that revealed the true purpose of the facility. Observation chambers, Rodriguez explained, showing Crane a room with one-way glass windows that looked into what appeared to be living quarters. Someone's been watching these women 24 hours a day. The living quarters were designed like luxury apartments, but with subtle modifications that revealed their true nature as prison cells. The windows couldn't be opened from the inside. The doors locked automatically. Hidden cameras were positioned to monitor every activity. How many residents? Crane asked. We've found 8 women so far, all showing the same psychological conditioning we saw in Albuquerque. They're calm, compliant, and insist that they're here voluntarily for therapeutic treatment. As Crane moved through the facility, he discovered rooms that made his blood run cold. A medical treatment center equipped with electroshock therapy equipment. A sensory deprivation chamber where subjects could be isolated for extended periods. A computer lab filled with what appeared to be psychological testing and monitoring equipment. "Agent Crane," came a voice through his earpiece. "We've got a problem in Building C." Building C turned out to be a dormitory-style facility, housing 12 women who were in various stages of psychological conditioning. But unlike the compliant victims they had found elsewhere, these women were showing signs of resistance to their conditioning. "Please help us," one of them called out when she saw the FBI tactical team. "They've been doing things to our minds. We can't remember who we are or where we came from." Dr. Sarah Williams, a psychiatrist who had been brought in to evaluate the victims, immediately began conducting preliminary assessments. "Agent Crane, these women are showing signs of severe psychological trauma," Dr. Williams reported. "They've been subjected to systematic brainwashing using techniques that appear to combine pharmaceutical conditioning, sensory deprivation, and what I can only describe as psychological torture. Are they going to recover? It's too early to tell. Some of them may have suffered permanent personality damage. The techniques used here are far more sophisticated than anything I've encountered in my 20 years of treating trauma victims." As the search of the facility continued, they discovered evidence that Dr. Henley's operation was even more extensive than they had realized. Computer files contained detailed psychological profiles for over 200 women across multiple states, suggesting that he had been conducting surveillance and target identification on a massive scale. "Agent Crane," called Agent Martinez from the administrative building, "you need to see what we found in Henley's office." The office was a monument to organized obsession. File cabinets contained detailed records for each victim, including psychological assessments, conditioning protocols, and what appeared to be placement records for graduates of the program. But it was the correspondence files that revealed the true scope of the horror. Dr. Henley had been selling psychologically conditioned women to clients across the country, marketing them as therapeutic companions, domestic assistants, and personal care providers. He's been running a human trafficking operation disguised as a treatment program, Martinez observed. "Not just trafficking," Crane corrected as he read through the files. "He's been manufacturing customized slaves with specific psychological profiles designed to meet client specifications." The client list was equally disturbing. Wealthy individuals, corporations, and even government agencies that had apparently been purchasing psychologically conditioned women for various purposes. "Agent Crane," came another voice through his earpiece, "we've got reports from the other facilities. Total victim count is 43 women, ages ranging from 19 to 31, all showing signs of systematic psychological conditioning." As the magnitude of Dr. Henley's operation became clear, Crane realized that they had uncovered one of the most sophisticated human trafficking and psychological abuse cases in FBI history. But they were also facing a practical problem that law enforcement wasn't equipped to handle. "Dr. Williams, what kind of treatment are these women going to need?" "Extensive psychiatric care, possibly for years. Many of them will require specialized deprogramming therapy to reverse the conditioning they've undergone. Some may never fully recover their original personalities. And the ones who have been completely conditioned?" Dr. Williams looked grim. "Agent Crane, I'm not sure those women can be saved. The level of psychological conditioning we're seeing here may have permanently altered their brain function. They may be psychologically incapable of independent thought or decision-making." As Crane stood in Dr. Henley's office, surrounded by evidence of systematic psychological destruction on an industrial scale, he found himself facing a disturbing question. How many other operations like this were currently operating throughout the country? The interrogation of the staff members arrested during the raids revealed that Dr. Henley's operation was part of a much larger network of similar facilities operating across the United States and internationally. Under pressure from federal prosecutors, several staff members agreed to provide information in exchange for reduced sentences. Dr. Henley wasn't the founder of this network, revealed Dr. Janet Morrison, a psychologist who had worked at the Santa Fe facility for 3 years. He was more like a regional manager. The real organization is much bigger and much more sophisticated. Agent Blackthorne conducted the debriefing in a secure conference room at the FBI field office, with Crane observing from behind one-way glass. Dr. Morrison appeared to be genuinely terrified of the organization she had been working for. "Tell us about the structure of this network," Blackthorne said. "It's called the Institute for Advanced Behavioral Research," Morrison replied. "They operate facilities in every major metropolitan area in the United States, plus international locations in Europe and Asia. The total operation involves thousands of women." "What's the purpose of this network?" "On the surface, it's marketed as advanced therapeutic treatment for various psychological conditions. But the real purpose is to create a supply of psychologically conditioned individuals for various specialized applications, such as domestic service for ultra-wealthy families, personal assistance for high-level executives who need absolute discretion and loyalty, companions for elderly clients who want someone completely devoted to their care, and other purposes that I wasn't directly involved with." Crane felt his stomach turn as the full scope of the operation became clear. They weren't just dealing with a single predator. They were facing an international human trafficking organization that had industrialized the process of psychological conditioning. "Dr. Morrison, how are victims selected and recruited?" "The Institute maintains psychological profiles for millions of women through data mining of social media, employment records, medical records, and other sources. They identify women who fit specific psychological and physical criteria, then conduct extended surveillance to determine their suitability for conditioning. The blood-written messages? That's just one of many psychological preparation techniques. Different facilities use different approaches, but they all serve the same purpose: breaking down the victim's psychological defenses before capture." "How long has this organization been operating?" "The current network has been in operation since the early 1990s, but it grew out of research programs that date back to the 1960s. Much of the original research was funded by government agencies, but the network became privatized in the 1980s. Agent Blackthorne showed Morrison photographs of the financial records they had seized from Henley's facilities. "Who funds this operation now?" "A combination of client payments, private donations from wealthy individuals, and what I believe are ongoing government contracts. Some of the conditioning programs are specifically designed to create assets for intelligence and security applications." The possibility that government agencies were still involved in funding psychological conditioning programs was deeply disturbing. If Morrison was telling the truth, it meant that taxpayer money was being used to support systematic human trafficking and psychological torture. "Dr. Morrison, where are the other facilities located?" "I only know about a few of them directly, but based on what I observed during training sessions and administrative meetings, there are major facilities in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Miami, and Houston, plus smaller operations in dozens of other cities." Training sessions. All staff members receive extensive training in psychological conditioning techniques. The Institute has developed sophisticated protocols for personality modification that are far more advanced than anything in mainstream psychology. Crane studied Morrison's demeanor carefully. She appeared to be telling the truth, but her level of detailed knowledge suggested that she had been much more involved in the operation than she was admitting. Dr. Morrison, what was your specific role in the conditioning process? I was responsible for psychological assessment and monitoring. I would evaluate victims' psychological resilience, identify optimal conditioning approaches, and track their progress through the modification process. You personally participated in the psychological torture of dozens of women. Morrison's composure cracked for the first time. You don't understand. The Institute presents this as legitimate therapeutic research. They have extensive documentation showing that the conditioning process helps women overcome psychological dysfunction and find greater happiness and purpose by erasing their personalities and turning them into slaves, by helping them discover their authentic selves, free from the social conditioning that was making them miserable. Crane realized that even the staff members had been subjected to psychological conditioning to make them believe that their work was beneficial rather than criminal. The Institute had created an entire mythology that justified systematic psychological abuse as therapeutic treatment. Dr. Morrison, how do we find the other facilities? I can provide addresses for the ones I know about directly. But Agent Blackthorne, you need to understand that shutting down a few facilities won't stop this organization. They have resources, political connections, and technical capabilities that far exceed what most law enforcement agencies can handle. What do you mean? The Institute has been infiltrating government agencies, law enforcement, and the judicial system for decades. They have assets in positions where they can influence investigations, manipulate evidence, and protect their operations from prosecution. The possibility that the FBI's own investigation was being monitored or influenced by Institute assets was a chilling thought. If Morrison was right, they might be facing an organization that had the power to undermine law enforcement efforts from within. Dr. Morrison, do you have any information about Institute assets within federal law enforcement? Morrison hesitated, looking around the room as if she expected to be overheard. I was never given specific names, but during my time at the Santa Fe facility, I observed several occasions when local and federal law enforcement activities were predicted and avoided through what appeared to be advance intelligence. Someone was tipping off the Institute about law enforcement investigations. I believe so. And if they have that kind of access to government intelligence, they probably know about this investigation and are already taking steps to protect their remaining operations. As the debriefing concluded, Crane found himself facing the most disturbing case of his career. They had uncovered evidence of an international criminal organization that had been operating for decades, had sophisticated psychological conditioning capabilities, and appeared to have infiltrated law enforcement and government agencies. But the most terrifying realization was that rescuing Dr. Henley's victims might have only alerted the Institute to the FBI's investigation, causing them to accelerate their operations or eliminate evidence that could expose the full scope of their network. 3 weeks after the raids on Dr. Henley's facilities, Agent Crane found himself sitting in a secure conference room at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., facing a panel of senior officials who looked as disturbed by the evidence as he felt. The investigation had expanded into a multi-agency task force involving the FBI, CIA, and Department of Homeland Security. Agent Crane, said Deputy Director Sarah Martinez, your investigation has uncovered what appears to be the largest human trafficking and psychological conditioning operation in U.S. history. But we're facing some unusual complications. What kind of complications? Political complications. Some of the individuals and organizations implicated in the Institute's operations have connections to current and former government officials. We're being pressured to limit the scope of the investigation. Assistant Director James Wilson consulted a thick file before continuing. Agent Crane, we've identified over 300 potential victims across 12 states. But we've also discovered that some of the Institute's graduates have been placed in positions where exposing their conditioning could compromise national security. What do you mean? Personal assistants to senators, domestic staff for federal judges, companions for retired intelligence officials. If these individuals have been psychologically conditioned to gather intelligence or influence decision-making, the security implications are staggering. Crane felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying that the Institute has been using conditioned women to infiltrate the highest levels of government? That's exactly what we're saying, Wilson replied. And the problem is that we can't determine which individuals are voluntary employees and which are conditioned assets without conducting psychological evaluations that would expose the investigation. What about Dr. Henley? What has he told us about the higher levels of the organization? Deputy Director Martinez looked grim. Dr. Henley died in federal custody 3 days ago. Apparent suicide, but the circumstances are suspicious. Suspicious how? He was found in his cell with a note apologizing for his actions and claiming that he acted alone. But the handwriting analysis suggests the note was written under duress, and the security footage from his cell block shows a gap during the time period when he supposedly killed himself. The implication that Dr. Henley had been murdered to prevent him from revealing information about the Institute sent a chill through the room. If the organization had the capability to eliminate a federal prisoner in a secure facility, their reach and resources were far greater than anyone had imagined. Agent Crane, continued Martinez, we need you to understand that this investigation is entering a phase where your personal safety may be at risk. The Institute appears to have significant resources and the willingness to use violence to protect their operations. What are you recommending? Protective custody until we can determine the full scope of the threat. And, Agent Crane, we need to discuss something else that's been discovered during the investigation. Martinez handed him a file containing what appeared to be personnel records from the Institute's operations. Agent Crane, according to documents seized from the Santa Fe facility, you've been under Institute surveillance for the past 2 years. Crane felt the room spin around him as he read through detailed reports of his daily activities, personal relationships, and professional assignments. The Institute had been watching him long before the Albuquerque missing persons case had been assigned to him. Why would they be surveilling me? We believe you were being evaluated as a potential target for conditioning. Your psychological profile fits their criteria for law enforcement assets. The possibility that his entire involvement in the case had been orchestrated by the Institute was terrifying. If they had been planning to capture and condition him, it meant that his investigation might have been playing directly into their hands. Agent Crane, said Wilson, there's something else. The missing persons case in Albuquerque appears to have been deliberately constructed to draw FBI attention. We believe the Institute wanted federal law enforcement to discover Dr. Henley's operation. But why? Because Dr. Henley was a liability who knew too much about their overall operation. By exposing his facilities, they eliminated a security risk while making it appear that law enforcement had successfully shut down their network. Crane realized with growing horror that they had been manipulated from the beginning. The Institute had sacrificed one of their regional operations to protect the larger network, and they had used the FBI's own investigation to eliminate evidence that could have exposed their true scope. How do we know that this briefing isn't being monitored by Institute assets? Crane asked. The silence that followed his question was answer enough. Even at the highest levels of federal law enforcement, they couldn't be certain that their communications and operations weren't being observed by the organization they were trying to investigate. "Agent Crane," Martinez said finally, "we're going to have to make some difficult decisions about how to proceed with this investigation. The political and security implications are too complex for traditional law enforcement approaches. Prosecute all the perpetrators through conventional means." The idea that they might have to abandon some of the Institute's victims for political or security reasons made Crane feel sick. But as he looked around the room at the faces of senior officials who were clearly out of their depth, he realized that the Institute had created a situation that was beyond the capabilities of normal law enforcement. "Agent Crane," Wilson said, "there's one more thing you need to know. The psychological evaluation of the victims we rescued from Dr. Henley's facilities has revealed something disturbing." "What?" "Several of the women are showing signs of programmed psychological triggers that activate under specific circumstances. Dr. Williams believes they may have been conditioned to perform certain actions or behaviors when exposed to particular stimuli. What kind of actions? We don't know yet, but the conditioning appears to be designed to remain dormant until activated by external signals. These women could be walking time bombs, psychologically speaking." Crane felt the full weight of the investigation settling on his shoulders. They weren't just dealing with rescued victims who needed therapy. They were dealing with individuals who had been turned into potential weapons through sophisticated psychological conditioning. "Agent Crane," Martinez said, "we're reassigning you to a classified task force that will continue investigating the Institute through alternative channels. Your official case file will show that the Albuquerque investigation was successfully concluded with the arrest and death of Dr. Marcus Henley. And the truth is classified at levels that most federal agents will never access. What you've discovered about the Institute's operations cannot be discussed with anyone outside this task force." As Crane prepared to leave the briefing, he realized that his career as a traditional federal agent was over. He had uncovered something so large and so deeply embedded in government and society that it couldn't be addressed through normal law enforcement channels. "Agent Crane," Wilson called out as he reached the door, "one more thing. The Institute's surveillance of you included monitoring your personal relationships and family members. We're placing your ex-wife and daughter in protective custody until we can assess the level of threat they may be facing." The realization that his family might be at risk because of his investigation sent a surge of fear and anger through Crane. The Institute hadn't just been targeting him professionally, they had been threatening everything he cared about. "How long have they been watching my family?" "According to the documents we recovered, at least 18 months. But Agent Crane, there's something else you need to understand about your selection for this case." Martinez showed him a psychological profile that had apparently been compiled by the Institute's researchers. It contained detailed analysis of his personality, his professional capabilities, and his psychological vulnerabilities. According to this assessment, you were considered an ideal candidate for psychological conditioning. Your commitment to justice, your emotional isolation following your divorce, and your tendency toward obsessive investigation made you particularly susceptible to their manipulation techniques. They were planning to recruit me. They were planning to condition you, to turn you into one of their assets within federal law enforcement. The idea that the entire case had been an elaborate recruitment scheme was almost too disturbing to comprehend. The Institute had been playing a game where the FBI's investigation was just another move in their larger strategy. "Agent Crane," Martinez continued, "we believe that your resistance to their psychological manipulation during the investigation may have saved your life, but it also made you a significant threat to their operations. What happens now?" Now you disappear into the classified world of counterintelligence operations. Officially, Agent Bartholomew Crane will take early retirement due to psychological stress related to the Albuquerque case. Unofficially, you'll be working to identify and dismantle Institute operations using methods that conventional law enforcement can't employ. As Crane left FBI headquarters, he found himself walking through Washington, D.C., with the strange sensation that he was being watched by invisible eyes. The Institute's surveillance capabilities were so sophisticated that they might be monitoring his movements even within the most secure government facilities. But the most disturbing realization was that he might never know if his own thoughts and perceptions were entirely his own. The Institute's psychological conditioning techniques were sophisticated enough that they could potentially influence someone without them realizing it. Special Agent Thaddeus Grimm had been with the Bureau for 16 years when the Seattle field office handed him what would become the most disturbing case of his career. It was a crisp October morning in 2024 when his supervisor, SAC Jennifer Martinez, called him into her office with a manila folder that seemed unusually thick for a standard assignment. "Grimm, I need you to take point on something that came down from D.C., Martinez said, sliding the folder across her desk. "Human trafficking investigation, but this one's different." Thaddeus opened the folder and immediately felt his stomach tighten. The first photograph showed a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with hollow eyes and track marks along her arms. But it wasn't the obvious signs of drug abuse that unsettled him. It was something in her expression. She looked empty, completely vacant, as if someone had simply turned off a switch inside her brain. Her name was Rebecca Chen, Martinez continued, found wandering downtown Seattle 3 weeks ago, completely catatonic. When patrol officers approached her, she just kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "The network sees everything. The network knows everything. The network controls everything." Thaddeus flipped through more photographs. Each showed a different young woman, all with that same terrifying vacancy in their eyes. All between the ages of 18 and 25. All found in major metropolitan areas across the Pacific Northwest over the past 6 months. "How many?" he asked. 17 confirmed cases, all displaying identical symptoms. Complete psychological breakdown, repetitive speech patterns, and what the psychiatrists are calling induced dissociative identity disorder. But here's the thing that has DC spooked. Martinez paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Every single one of these women was reported missing from different states, different backgrounds, different circumstances, but they all share one commonality. She handed him another file. This one contained online profiles, social media screenshots, and what appeared to be application forms. They all applied for the same modeling agency, Martinez said. Ethereal Modeling Solutions, high-end escort service masquerading as legitimate talent representation, based out of a seemingly legitimate office building in downtown Portland. Thaddeus studied the documents. The modeling agency's website looked professional enough. Sleek design, testimonials from satisfied clients, a roster of beautiful women advertising everything from fashion shows to private events. But something about the language felt off. Phrases like complete transformation experience and surrender to your highest potential seemed more suited to a cult recruitment page than a modeling agency. "What makes this federal jurisdiction?" Thaddeus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Interstate trafficking for starters, but that's not why they called us in." Martinez's expression darkened. 3 days ago, a tech analyst at Quantico flagged some unusual activity on the dark web. Someone's been selling something called neural reconfiguration services, basically advertising the ability to completely reprogram a human personality. The asking price? $2 million per subject. The implications hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. You're telling me someone is experimenting on these women? Trying to turn them into what, exactly? We don't know. But we have reason to believe that whoever's running this operation has access to experimental neurotechnology, possibly military-grade psychological conditioning techniques that shouldn't exist outside of classified government programs. Martinez handed him one final document. It was a medical report from Dr. Sarah Kim at Harborview Medical Center, the psychiatric specialist who had been treating Rebecca Chen. "Read the neurological assessment," Martinez said quietly. Thaddeus scanned the technical language until he reached a section that made his blood run cold. Patient displays evidence of systematic memory, fragmentation, consistent with prolonged exposure to advanced psychological conditioning techniques. Brain scans reveal unusual activity patterns in the hippocampus and amygdala, suggesting possible artificial manipulation of memory formation and emotional responses. Most disturbing, patients' neural patterns appear to have been deliberately restructured in a way that resembles documented cases of MK-Ultra experimentation, but utilizing technology far more sophisticated than anything available during that program. "Jesus Christ," Thaddeus whispered. "The director wants this handled quietly," Martinez continued. "No local law enforcement, no media leaks. You'll be working with Agent Cordelia Blackwood from the Behavioral Analysis Unit. She's flying up from Quantico tonight." Thaddeus had heard of Agent Blackwood. She was something of a legend in the Bureau, known for her ability to get inside the heads of the most twisted criminals. If they were bringing her in, this case was even worse than it appeared. "What's my cover?" "You're going undercover as a potential client. We've created a backstory. You're Thaddeus Morrison, wealthy tech executive looking for discreet companionship for high-profile business events. The kind of money that gets you access to their premium services. And if they discover I'm Bureau?" Martinez's silence was answer enough. The Ethereal Modeling Solutions office occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Portland high-rise. As Thaddeus rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, he tried to calm his nerves by reviewing his cover story. Thaddeus Morrison, founder of a fictional cybersecurity firm, recently sold for 8 figures. Single, no family, lots of disposable income, and a taste for exclusive experiences. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a high-end spa rather than a modeling agency. Soft lighting, white leather furniture, and the subtle scent of lavender created an atmosphere of luxurious calm. Behind a curved white desk sat a stunning blonde woman who couldn't have been older than 22. "Mr. Morrison?" she asked, with a practiced smile. "I'm Amber. Miss Volkov is expecting you." As Amber led him down a hallway lined with professional photographs of beautiful women, Thaddeus noticed something that made his skin crawl. In every photo, the models had the same expression. Not quite the vacant stare he'd seen in the victim photographs, but close. A subtle emptiness behind the eyes, as if they were looking through the camera rather than at it. "Here we are," Amber said, opening a door to reveal an office that was more like a luxury lounge. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Portland skyline, while expensive artwork and carefully placed mood lighting created an atmosphere of sophisticated seduction. Behind a glass desk sat a woman who immediately commanded attention. Tall, probably in her early 40s, with sharp cheekbones and platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Everything about her radiated control and calculated precision. "Mr. Morrison," she said, rising to extend a manicured hand. "I'm Natasha Volkov, founder and director of Ethereal Modeling Solutions. Please have a seat." Her accent was faint but unmistakably Eastern European. As Thaddeus settled into a leather chair across from her desk, he noticed her eyes, ice blue and completely devoid of warmth. They reminded him of a predator studying prey. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me," Thaddeus said, falling into his cover persona. "I have to admit your agency comes highly recommended." "We pride ourselves on providing unique experiences for discerning clients," Natasha replied. "But before we discuss specifics, I need to understand exactly what you're looking for. Our services range from simple companionship to much more comprehensive arrangements." There was something in the way she said comprehensive that made Thaddeus's instincts scream, but he maintained his composure, leaning forward with the expression of a wealthy man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "I'm interested in exclusivity," he said. "Someone who can adapt to any social situation, who understands discretion and who can provide complete dedication to my needs." Natasha's smile grew wider, but it never reached her eyes. "I see. You're looking for what we call our premium experience. This involves a much deeper level of customization." She turned her computer monitor toward him, displaying what appeared to be a catalog. But instead of typical modeling portfolios, each entry included detailed psychological profiles alongside physical statistics. Categories like compliance level, adaptability rating, and memory retention were listed next to measurements and photographs. "Our premium clients work directly with our in-house specialists to design their ideal companion," Natasha explained. "We can modify personality traits, eliminate unwanted behaviors, and even implant specific skills or knowledge sets. The process typically takes 3 to 6 months, depending on the complexity of the transformation." Thaddeus felt sick, but forced himself to lean forward with apparent interest. "That's impressive. How exactly does this transformation process work?" "Trade secrets, I'm afraid," Natasha said with a laugh that sounded like ice-breaking. "But I can tell you that we've revolutionized the industry by combining traditional conditioning techniques with cutting-edge neurotechnology. Our success rate is 100%. We guarantee complete satisfaction, or your investment is fully refunded." "And the women consent to this?" "Of course. All of our models sign comprehensive agreements outlining the full scope of their transformation. They understand that they're embarking on a journey to become their highest possible selves, free from the limitations of their previous personalities and life experiences." The clinical way she described what amounted to psychological destruction made Thaddeus's skin crawl. But he nodded thoughtfully, as if considering a major purchase. "I'd like to see your facilities," he said. "Before I commit to an investment of this magnitude, I need to understand the full scope of your operation." For the first time, Natasha's expression showed a flicker of something. Calculation, perhaps, or suspicion. "Our transformation center is located at a private facility outside the city. We only allow client visits during the final stages of the process, to protect the privacy and well-being of our models during their most vulnerable periods." "I understand the need for discretion," Thaddeus said. "But I'm sure you can appreciate that a man in my position needs certain assurances before investing several $1,000,000. The mention of money seemed to tip the scales. Natasha's predatory smile returned. "Of course. I think we can arrange a limited tour of our facilities. But first, I'll need you to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and undergo a background verification process." She handed him a tablet with what appeared to be a standard NDA, but as Thaddeus scrolled through the document, he noticed clauses that went far beyond typical confidentiality agreements. Phrases like psychological evaluation consent and memory modification authorization were buried in the legal jargon. "This is quite thorough," he said. "We take security very seriously," Natasha replied. "Our client's privacy is paramount, and we found that comprehensive agreements protect everyone involved." Thaddeus signed the document, knowing that it would likely be inadmissible in court anyway, given that he was signing under false pretenses. But as he handed the tablet back to Natasha, she pressed a button on her desk. "Amber will see you out," she said, as the blonde receptionist appeared in the doorway. "I'll have my security team complete their verification process overnight. If everything checks out, we can arrange your facility tour for tomorrow evening." As Thaddeus stood to leave, Natasha added, "Oh, and Mr. Morrison, I should mention that our verification process is quite thorough. We have access to databases that most people assume are private. So, I trust there won't be any surprises in your background check." The threat was barely veiled, but Thaddeus maintained his confident businessman demeanor. "I'm an open book, Miss Volkov. I look forward to tomorrow evening." But as he left the office, Thaddeus couldn't shake the feeling that Natasha Volkov had seen right through his cover. And if that was the case, he might be walking into a trap that would make him the next victim of whatever twisted experiment was being conducted at their transformation center. Thaddeus spent the rest of the day at a secure bureau safe house across town, working with Agent Cordelia Blackwood to prepare for what could be his most dangerous undercover operation. Blackwood had arrived from Quantico that morning, and her reputation for psychological insight was immediately apparent. "She knows," Blackwood said bluntly as she reviewed the audio recording of Thaddeus's meeting with Natasha Volkov. "The question is how much and whether she plans to use you as an asset or eliminate you as a threat." Agent Blackwood was a small woman in her early 40s, with graying brown hair and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see straight through people. She had spent 15 years analyzing the most dangerous criminals in federal custody, and her assessment of Natasha Volkov was chilling. "This woman isn't just running a human trafficking operation," Blackwood continued. "Based on her behavior patterns and the psychological profiles of the victims, I believe we're dealing with someone conducting systematic experiments in personality reconstruction. She's essentially creating living dolls, human beings stripped of their original identity and reprogrammed to serve specific functions." "But how is that even possible?" Thaddeus asked. "We're talking about completely rewriting someone's personality. That's science fiction." "Not anymore," Blackwood replied grimly. "The technology exists, or at least the early stages of it. During the Cold War, both the CIA and KGB conducted extensive research into psychological conditioning and memory modification. Most of those programs were officially shut down, but the research continued in private laboratories funded by defense contractors and pharmaceutical companies." She opened her laptop and showed him a classified report from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. 3 years ago, DARPA was working on something called the Neural Modification Protocol, a combination of pharmaceutical conditioning, electronic brain stimulation, and advanced psychological manipulation designed to create the perfect soldier. Someone who could follow orders without question, adapt to any situation, and feel no emotional attachment to their previous life. What happened to the program? Officially, it was shut down due to ethical concerns. Unofficially, the research was privatized and sold to the highest bidder. Thaddeus felt a chill run down his spine. "You think Volkov has access to this technology?" "I think Volkov might be one of the original researchers," Blackwood said. Her background check came back with some interesting gaps. She emigrated from Russia in 2018, supposedly fleeing political persecution, but there's no record of her existence before 2015, and her educational credentials can't be verified through normal channels. So, she's using a false identity. More than that, I think she's a former intelligence operative with specialized knowledge in psychological warfare, which means she almost certainly knows you're not who you claim to be. The implications were terrifying. If Natasha Volkov suspected he was federal law enforcement, tomorrow's facility tour could be a one-way trip. But backing out now would only confirm her suspicions and potentially compromise the entire investigation. "So, what's our play?" Thaddeus asked. "We proceed, but with full tactical support," Blackwood replied. "I'll be monitoring from a surveillance van with a full tactical team. You'll be wearing a wire and a GPS tracker, and we'll have satellite coverage of the entire area. If anything goes wrong, we can have a response team on site within minutes." "And if they detect the surveillance equipment?" Blackwood's expression was grim. "Then you'll need to survive long enough for us to find you." The next evening, Thaddeus found himself in the passenger seat of a black SUV, driven by a man who had introduced himself only as Victor. The driver was built like a professional boxer, with scarred hands and the kind of alertness that suggested military training. He hadn't spoken a word during the 40-minute drive into the hills outside Portland. As they turned onto a private road, marked only by a discreet sign reading Serenity Wellness Center, Thaddeus tried to memorize landmarks that might help the tactical team locate him if things went wrong. The road wound through dense forest for several miles before emerging into a clearing dominated by a complex of modern buildings that looked more like a high-tech research facility than a wellness center. "Welcome to our Transformation Center," Natasha Volkov said as Victor led Thaddeus into the main building's lobby. She was dressed in an elegant black dress that somehow made her appear even more predatory than she had in her office. "I think you'll find our facilities quite impressive." The lobby was similar to the Portland office, all white surfaces and carefully controlled lighting. But there was something subtly different about this place. The air seemed thicker, and there was an underlying smell that reminded Thaddeus of a hospital or a laboratory. "Our facility operates 24 hours a day," Natasha explained as she led him down a long corridor lined with what appeared to be office doors. "We currently have 18 models in various stages of transformation, each receiving personalized treatment designed to optimize their development." As they walked, Thaddeus became aware of a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was almost subliminal, just at the edge of hearing, but it created a sense of unease that made his skin crawl. "What's that sound?" he asked. "Background audio conditioning," Natasha replied casually. "We use specific frequency patterns to promote relaxation and receptivity. It helps accelerate the transformation process." They stopped at a door marked Observation Deck A, and Natasha produced a keycard to unlock it. Beyond the door was a small room with a large window that looked down into what appeared to be a therapy session. Below them, a young woman sat in a comfortable chair facing a man in a white coat. But something was wrong with the scene. The woman, she couldn't have been older than 20, sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead with no expression whatsoever. The man was speaking to her, but from their vantage point, Thaddeus couldn't hear what he was saying. "Stage 3 conditioning," Natasha explained. "At this point, we've successfully eliminated her previous personality structure and are beginning to implant new behavioral patterns. She'll spend approximately 6 hours per day in conditioning sessions for the next month." Eliminated her previous personality? Thaddeus tried to keep his voice steady. "Think of it as a complete psychological renovation," Natasha said with disturbing enthusiasm. "We remove all the accumulated trauma, negative behavioral patterns, and limiting beliefs that prevent someone from reaching their full potential. It's actually quite liberating for them. They wake up each day feeling lighter, freer, more open to new experiences. As Thaddeus watched, the man in the white coat held up a series of photographs. Each time he showed the young woman a picture, she nodded once and repeated something that Thaddeus couldn't hear. Her movements were mechanical, like a robot following programmed responses. "What happens to their memories?" he asked. "Selective retention," Natasha replied. "We preserve useful skills and knowledge while eliminating personal attachments and emotional associations. For example, she'll remember how to speak and read, but she won't remember her childhood, her family, or her previous relationships. It creates a clean slate for personality reconstruction." The clinical way she described the complete destruction of a human being's identity made Thaddeus feel physically sick. But he forced himself to nod thoughtfully, as if he were evaluating an expensive piece of technology. "Impressive," he said. "How do you ensure the modifications are permanent?" "Ongoing reinforcement," Natasha said. "Even after the primary transformation is complete, our models require regular maintenance sessions to prevent personality drift. We recommend weekly sessions for the first year, then monthly sessions thereafter." They moved to another observation window, this one looking down at what appeared to be a dormitory. Approximately a dozen young women sat on beds arranged in perfect rows. None of them spoke. None of them moved unless specifically directed by the staff members who moved between them like zookeepers tending to sedated animals. "Stage 2 subjects," Natasha explained. "They're learning to let go of their previous selves. At this stage, they still retain some memory of their past lives, but they're beginning to understand that those memories are obstacles to their transformation." One of the women suddenly began crying, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A staff member immediately approached her with a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. He held it near her head, and within seconds her crying stopped. She resumed the same vacant stare as the others. "Neural feedback inhibition," Natasha said, noticing Thaddeus's interest. "When subjects experience emotional distress, we can provide immediate relief through targeted electromagnetic stimulation. It's much more humane than traditional pharmaceutical intervention. And more effective, I imagine, considerably. Traditional drugs affect the entire system. Our neural feedback devices can target specific brain regions with surgical precision. We can eliminate fear, sadness, or resistance while leaving other cognitive functions intact." They continued the tour through a series of rooms that looked like a twisted combination of a medical facility and a luxury spa. Treatment rooms equipped with devices that looked like advanced MRI machines. A sensory deprivation center, where subjects floated in isolation tanks while electronic equipment monitored their brain activity. A personality programming laboratory, where technicians worked at computer terminals displaying what appeared to be three-dimensional models of human brains. But it was the final stop on the tour that nearly broke Thaddeus's cover. Natasha led him to an observation window that looked down into a room where a young woman was strapped to a table, her head covered with a complex array of electrodes and monitoring equipment. Her eyes were open, but they showed no awareness of her surroundings. Machines beeped and hummed around her, while technicians made adjustments to various devices. "Stage 1 initiation," Natasha explained. "This is where we begin the personality dissolution process. Over the course of 72 hours, we use a combination of sensory deprivation, electromagnetic brain stimulation, and pharmaceutical conditioning to break down the subject's existing neural pathways." "Is she aware of what's happening?" "Physically, yes, but we've essentially disconnected her conscious mind from her sensory input. She can see and hear, but she can't process the information in a meaningful way. It's like being in a waking dream state." As Thaddeus watched, the young woman's body suddenly convulsed against the restraints. Her eyes rolled back, showing only white, and her mouth opened in what would have been a scream if not for the tube that had been inserted down her throat. "Perfectly normal," Natasha said dismissively. "Neural pathway restructuring can cause temporary seizure-like activity. The sedatives prevent any actual discomfort." Thaddeus had to grip the railing to keep himself from either vomiting or pulling his weapon. What he was witnessing wasn't transformation or conditioning. It was systematic torture designed to completely destroy a human being's mind. "I think I've seen enough," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Of course," Natasha replied. "I'm sure you need time to consider your investment. But before you go, I have something special to show you." She led him to a final room that was decorated like an elegant living space. Comfortable furniture, soft lighting, tasteful artwork. A young woman sat reading in an armchair, and when they entered, she looked up with a warm smile. "Good evening, Miss Volkov," she said. "How may I serve you tonight?" The woman was beautiful in an almost artificial way. Perfect makeup, perfectly styled hair, perfect posture. But her eyes held the same emptiness that Thaddeus had seen in all the other victims. "This is Elena," Natasha said proudly. "She completed her transformation 6 months ago. Elena, I'd like you to meet Mr. Morrison." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Morrison," Elena said, rising gracefully to offer her hand. "Is there anything I can do to make your visit more comfortable?" Her voice was warm and pleasant, but there was something mechanical about her speech patterns. Each word was perfectly enunciated, each gesture carefully controlled. She moved like someone following a precise script. "Elena represents the pinnacle of our work," Natasha explained. "She possesses all the intelligence and skills of her previous self, but none of the emotional baggage or behavioral limitations. She's perfectly adaptable, completely obedient, and incapable of experiencing negative emotions like jealousy, anger, or resentment." "What was she like before?" Thaddeus asked. "Elena, tell Mr. Morrison about your previous self," Natasha commanded. "My previous self was flawed and limited," Elena replied without hesitation. "She experienced inappropriate emotions, maintained harmful relationships, and harbored destructive thoughts. Through Miss Volkov's guidance, I was freed from those limitations and allowed to become my true self." "Do you remember anything about your life before the transformation?" "I remember that I was unhappy and confused," Elena said. "But those memories feel like they belong to someone else. My real life began when I arrived here." Thaddeus felt like he was talking to a robot programmed to mimic human responses. Elena showed no awareness that she had been systematically brainwashed and psychologically destroyed. In her mind, she had been saved and improved. "Remarkable," he said, hoping his disgust wasn't visible. "Elena will be delivered to her new placement next week," Natasha said. A technology executive in Silicon Valley who wanted a companion capable of discussing complex technical subjects while maintaining complete discretion about his business affairs. The customization process took 8 months, but I think you'll agree the results speak for themselves. As they prepared to leave, Elena returned to her chair and resumed reading as if they had never been there. She didn't look up or acknowledge their departure in any way. She had been programmed to respond only when directly addressed. "I think you can see why our services command premium pricing," Natasha said as Victor appeared to escort Thaddeus back to the SUV. "We're not simply providing companionship, we're creating entirely new human beings designed to meet our clients' exact specifications." During the ride back to Portland, Thaddeus struggled to process what he had witnessed. The facility wasn't just conducting human trafficking. It was operating a psychological torture chamber designed to completely destroy human identity and rebuild it according to customer specifications. The victims weren't being sold into slavery. They were being erased and replaced with programmed automatons. As Victor dropped him off at his hotel, Natasha handed him a business card. "I'll need your decision within 48 hours, she said. "If you're interested in commissioning your own transformation, we'll need to begin the preliminary work immediately. Our waiting list is quite extensive." "I'll be in touch," Thaddeus replied. But as the SUV disappeared into the night, he knew that he had less than 48 hours to coordinate a raid that would shut down the facility and save the victims. The question was whether there was enough left of those women to save. Back at the safe house, Thaddeus found Agent Blackwood pacing frantically while a team of technicians worked to enhance the audio and video feeds from his surveillance equipment. The footage from inside the facility was grainy, and the audio was corrupted by the same low-frequency humming that had made him so uncomfortable during the tour. "Tell me you got enough for a warrant," Thaddeus said as he collapsed into a chair, emotionally drained from maintaining his cover for the past 4 hours. "More than enough," Blackwood replied. "But we have a problem. I've been monitoring Adderall databases all evening, and someone with very high-level clearance has been accessing your background check information." She showed him a computer screen displaying a series of database queries. "Someone ran your social security number, your financial records, your employment history, and your travel patterns. But here's the interesting part. They also accessed classified Bureau personnel files. They know I'm FBI? Worse than that, they know exactly who you are, your case history, and the details of this operation. Whoever Volkov is working with has access to federal intelligence databases that should be impossible to penetrate." The implications hit Thaddeus like a sledgehammer. If Natasha Volkov knew he was federal law enforcement, why had she allowed him to tour the facility? Why show him evidence of systematic torture and psychological experimentation? "She wanted me to see it," he realized. "She wanted me to know exactly what they're doing." "But why?" Blackwood asked. Before Thaddeus could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Agent Grimm, you have 24 hours to decide whether you want to join our program voluntarily or become our next involuntary subject. Choose wisely. N.V." "Jesus Christ," Blackwood whispered. "She's been playing with us from the beginning." The realization that they had been outmaneuvered from the start was terrifying enough, but what followed was even worse. Over the next hour, Thaddeus began experiencing symptoms that he initially attributed to stress and exhaustion. A persistent headache, mild nausea, and a strange ringing in his ears that seemed to match the frequency of the humming sound he had heard at the facility. "I need some air," he told Blackwood, stepping outside onto the safe house's small balcony. But the symptoms only intensified. The headache became a pounding migraine, and the ringing in his ears grew louder. Even more disturbing, he began experiencing what felt like gaps in his memory. He would find himself standing in the middle of the room with no recollection of how he had gotten there, or discover that several minutes had passed without his awareness. "Blackwood," he called out, but his voice sounded strange to his own ears, hollow and distant, as if he were hearing it from underwater. She appeared in the doorway, and the expression on her face confirmed his worst fears. "Thaddeus, your pupils are dilated, and you're showing signs of neurological distress. I think they dosed you with something at the facility." "When?" "I didn't eat or drink anything while I was there. It doesn't have to be ingested," she replied grimly. "Advanced pharmaceutical compounds can be absorbed through skin contact or inhalation. That humming sound you described could have been covering the deployment of an aerosol compound." As if to confirm her assessment, Thaddeus's vision suddenly blurred, and he found himself experiencing what felt like a waking hallucination. The safe house around him seemed to shift and warp, walls breathing like living tissue while shadows moved independently of their sources. "We need to get you to a hospital," Blackwood said, but her voice seemed to be coming from very far away. "No," Thaddeus managed to say through the increasing disorientation. "If they can access federal databases, they probably have people in the medical system too. We can't trust anyone." But even as he spoke, Thaddeus realized that his ability to think clearly was rapidly deteriorating. The gaps in his memory were becoming longer and more frequent, and he was beginning to experience episodes where he felt like he was observing his own actions from outside his body. "Agent Blackwood," he said during a moment of clarity, "I need you to promise me something. If I become compromised, if they succeed in whatever they dosed me with, you have to stop this operation. Don't try to save me. Don't negotiate. Just shut them down." "Thaddeus, promise me," he insisted. "I've seen what they do to people. Death would be preferable to what they did to those women." But even as he spoke, Thaddeus could feel his sense of self beginning to fragment. Memories of his childhood, his training at Quantico, his years with the Bureau, they all seemed to be fading, becoming distant and insubstantial like half-remembered dreams. By morning, Thaddeus Grimm was no longer entirely himself. He retained his basic cognitive functions and most of his memories, but something fundamental had changed. The constant background noise in his head had evolved into what sounded almost like whispered instructions, just below the threshold of conscious understanding. Agent Blackwood had called in a specialized medical team from Quantico, but their attempts to identify and counteract the compound affecting Thaddeus had been unsuccessful. Blood tests showed trace amounts of several synthetic psychoactive substances, but nothing that explained the systematic way his personality seemed to be deteriorating. "It's not just pharmaceutical, Doctor." Jennifer Walsh, the Bureau's chief neurological specialist, explained to Blackwood. "The brain scans show patterns consistent with the electromagnetic conditioning. Someone has been remotely manipulating his neural activity using the same kind of technology we saw described in those DARPA files. Is it reversible? We don't know. This is beyond anything in our experience." What made the situation even more terrifying was that Thaddeus was aware of what was happening to him. He could feel his thoughts being influenced, his emotions dampened, his sense of independent will gradually eroding. But knowing what was happening didn't give him the power to stop it. "I can feel them in my head," he told Blackwood during one of his increasingly rare moments of clarity. "It's like there are voices just below the surface waiting to take control." The text messages from Natasha Volkov had continued throughout the night, each one more disturbing than the last. "Agent Grimm, you're experiencing stage 1 of our conditioning process. We can accelerate your transformation or allow it to proceed naturally. Your cooperation will determine which path we choose. Your resistance is admirable but futile. Our neural modification technology is far more advanced than anything your government possesses. You have 12 hours to report to our facility voluntarily. After that, we'll activate the secondary conditioning protocols and you'll lose the ability to choose." Each message came with precise details about Thaddeus's current condition. His vital signs, his brain activity patterns, even his location within the safe house. It was clear that they were monitoring him in real time through whatever technology they had used to compromise his nervous system. "They're treating him like a remote-controlled drone," Blackwood told the tactical team that had been assembled to raid the facility. "But we can't wait any longer. Every hour we delay, we lose more of Agent Grimm, and those women at the facility continue to suffer." But as the team prepared for the assault, Thaddeus realized that he was becoming a liability. The voices in his head were getting stronger, and he was beginning to experience periods where he felt compelled to follow instructions that weren't coming from anyone in the room with him. During one of these episodes, he found himself walking toward the door of the safe house with no conscious intention of leaving. Only Blackwood's intervention prevented him from simply walking out and presumably reporting to the facility as instructed by whatever signal was being transmitted to his compromised nervous system. "We need to isolate him," Dr. Walsh recommended. "If they can control his actions remotely, he could compromise the entire operation." But Thaddeus, during a brief moment of mental clarity, made a decision that would haunt everyone involved. "No," he said firmly. "We use this to our advantage. They want me to come to them? Let them have me." "Absolutely not," Blackwood replied. "You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have since this started," Thaddeus insisted. "They've shown their hand. They can monitor me, influence me, but they can't completely control me yet. That means I still have some autonomy, and that means I can get inside their facility with a legitimate reason to be there." The plan that Thaddeus proposed was insane by any rational standard, but it was also their best chance of gathering actionable intelligence about the facility's layout, security measures, and the location of the victims. He would allow himself to be recruited by Volkov's organization while wearing a specialized transmitter that could broadcast his location even through electromagnetic interference. "If I go dark, you wait exactly 6 hours, and then you hit the facility with everything you have," he told Blackwood. "Don't try to extract me. Don't negotiate. Just shut them down and save whoever you can." The next message from Natasha Volkov arrived less than an hour later. "Agent Grimm, your compliance window is closing. Report to coordinates 45.34, 42 degrees north, 123.1067 degrees west at 1800 hours. Come alone, or we'll activate the neural override protocols and you'll spend the rest of your very short life as a mindless puppet." Thaddeus arrived at the coordinates, a seemingly abandoned warehouse complex in an industrial district outside Portland, exactly on time. The building looked like it had been derelict for years, but as he approached the main entrance, he noticed subtle signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks in the gravel, new security cameras hidden among the rusted industrial equipment, and the faint hum of generators powering equipment somewhere inside the structure. The front door opened before he could knock, revealing Victor, the same driver who had taken him to the facility the previous evening. But Victor's demeanor was different now, more relaxed, almost friendly, as if Thaddeus was a welcome guest rather than a potential threat. "Mr. Grimm," Victor said with a slight accent that Thaddeus couldn't quite place. "Ms. Volkov is waiting for you. Please, come in." The interior of the warehouse had been completely renovated into what appeared to be a sophisticated operations center. Banks of computer equipment lined the walls, displaying everything from satellite imagery to what looked like real-time brain activity monitors. Technicians moved between workstations with the efficiency of people who had been working together for years, but it was the center of the room that drew Thaddeus's attention. A circular area had been cleared and filled with what looked like an advanced medical facility. Surgical lights, monitoring equipment, and a chair that resembled a cross between a dentist's chair and an electric chair. Cables and sensors hung from an overhead apparatus like the tentacles of some technological octopus. "Welcome to the real ethereal modeling solutions," Natasha Volkov said, as she emerged from behind a bank of monitors. She was dressed in what appeared to be medical scrubs, but her predatory smile was the same. "I trust your journey here was enlightening." Thaddeus realized that she was referring to the increasing difficulty he had experienced in thinking clearly during the drive to the warehouse. The voices in his head had grown stronger, and he had found himself following GPS directions to locations he had never consciously chosen. "What did you do to me?" he asked, though part of him no longer cared about the answer. "We gave you a preview of our services," Natasha replied. "The compound you were exposed to at our facility contains synthetic neurotropic agents that create temporary neural pathways in your brain. Think of it as a trial subscription to our consciousness modification service." She gestured to one of the monitors, which displayed what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of a human brain. Certain areas pulsed with different colors, and Thaddeus realized with growing horror that he was looking at his own neural activity in real time. "The beautiful thing about our technology," Natasha continued, "is that it doesn't just suppress existing personality traits. It allows us to implant entirely new ones. We can make you braver, more compliant, more intelligent, or more aggressive, depending on what our clients require. The women at your facility are the prototype models," Natasha finished. "Each one represents a different approach to personality reconstruction. Some were created for companionship, others for more specialized purposes. But you, Agent Grimm, represent something entirely new." She led him closer to the central chair, and Thaddeus found himself following despite every instinct screaming at him to run. The compulsion to obey was becoming stronger with each passing minute. "We've never attempted to modify a trained federal agent before," Natasha explained. "Your psychological profile presents unique challenges and opportunities. Your resistance to standard conditioning techniques is impressive, but it also makes you an ideal test subject for our most advanced modification protocols." "My team knows where I am," Thaddeus managed to say. "If I don't check in, your team is currently dealing with a series of false emergency calls that will keep them occupied for the next several hours," Natasha replied casually. "By the time they realize they've been misdirected, your transformation will be complete." As if to demonstrate her point, several technicians approached Thaddeus with restraints that looked deceptively soft and comfortable. He tried to resist, but his motor control seemed to be deteriorating. His hands moved sluggishly, and his legs felt like they were made of lead. "Don't fight it," Natasha said soothingly. "The neural inhibitors we've introduced to your system are designed to minimize distress during the initial conditioning phase. You'll find it much more pleasant if you simply allow the process to unfold naturally." They secured him in the chair with straps that felt like silk, but held him with the strength of steel cables. Electrodes were attached to his scalp, temples, and neck, while monitors began displaying readouts that he couldn't understand, but somehow found hypnotically fascinating. "What are you going to turn me into?" he asked, surprised that his voice sounded calm despite the terror he felt. "Something unprecedented," Natasha replied. "A federal agent with complete loyalty to our organization, but retaining all of your training, experience, and security clearances. Imagine the possibilities. A Bureau insider who can provide intelligence, misdirect investigations, and eliminate threats to our operation. The Bureau will know something's wrong. They'll detect the personality changes." "Will they?" Natasha asked with amusement. "Our modifications are much more subtle than the complete personality reconstruction we perform on our modeling subjects. You'll retain most of your memories, your behavioral patterns, and your professional competencies. The only difference will be a small but crucial adjustment to your core loyalties and value systems." As she spoke, technicians began activating the equipment surrounding the chair. Thaddeus felt a strange tingling sensation in his scalp, followed by what felt like a mild electrical current flowing through his brain. It wasn't painful. In fact, it was almost pleasant, like a gentle massage that seemed to ease the tension and anxiety he had been carrying. "The process typically takes between 8 and 12 hours, Natasha explained. as the electrical sensations intensified. During that time, we'll be carefully mapping your existing neural pathways and identifying the specific connections that need to be modified. Think of it as psychological surgery. We're not removing parts of your personality, just adjusting the wiring. Thaddeus tried to focus on his training, on the mission, on the need to gather intelligence that could save the other victims. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to hold on to coherent thoughts. The electrical stimulation seemed to be interfering with his ability to maintain concentration, and he found his attention drifting to the hypnotic patterns displayed on the monitors surrounding him. "You're probably wondering about the other agents who have sat in that chair," Natasha said conversationally. "We've had several federal law enforcement officers participate in our program over the past 2 years. Some from the DEA, a few from ATF, and even one from your own bureau." "Other agents?" Thaddeus managed to ask, though forming words was becoming more difficult. "Agent Patricia Hawthorne from the Seattle field office. Perhaps you know her. She's been providing us with very useful intelligence about ongoing investigations that might threaten our operations." The name hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. Agent Hawthorne had been his partner on a major case 6 months earlier, and she had seemed perfectly normal during their entire time working together. If Natasha was telling the truth, it meant their technology was advanced enough to modify someone's personality without leaving any detectable trace. "Patricia helped us identify you as a potential threat," Natasha continued. "She's the one who suggested we recruit you rather than simply eliminate you." Such a thoughtful colleague. As the electrical stimulation intensified, Thaddeus began experiencing what felt like memories that weren't quite his own. Images of himself working for Volkov's organization, providing classified information, helping to identify and neutralize threats to their operation. The memories felt completely real, even though he knew they had never happened. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Natasha observed, watching the readouts on her monitors. "We're essentially creating a parallel set of memories that will feel just as authentic as your real experiences. When the process is complete, you'll remember choosing to work with us, and that choice will feel completely rational and justified." "Stop," Thaddeus tried to say, but the word came out as barely a whisper. "I'm afraid that's no longer possible," Natasha replied. "We've reached the point of no return. Your brain is beginning to accept the new neural pathways we're creating, and attempting to reverse the process now would cause permanent psychological damage." As the hours passed, Thaddeus found himself drifting in and out of a strange state that wasn't quite consciousness and wasn't quite unconsciousness. During the lucid moments, he could see technicians monitoring his brain activity and making adjustments to the equipment. During the dreamlike periods, he experienced vivid hallucinations that seemed to be showing him glimpses of the true scope of Volkov's operation. He saw images of facilities like the one he had toured, but scattered across the country. Underground complexes hidden beneath legitimate businesses, private research laboratories, and even government installations. He saw politicians, business leaders, and law enforcement officials who moved with the same mechanical precision as the transformed women he had observed. "You're seeing the network." Natasha's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "What you discovered in Portland is just one small piece of a much larger operation. We have assets embedded throughout the federal government, major corporations, and law enforcement agencies across the nation." The implications were staggering. If what he was seeing was real, it meant that a shadow organization with advanced mind control technology had been systematically infiltrating American institutions for years. The modeling agency in Portland was just the visible tip of an iceberg that extended deep into the foundations of government and society. "Why show me this?" Thaddeus asked during one of his moments of clarity. Because you need to understand the futility of resistance, Natasha replied. Your colleagues at the Bureau believe they're investigating a human trafficking ring. They have no idea that they're facing an organization with the power to modify human consciousness itself. Even if they raid our Portland facility, they'll only find an empty building and a few carefully placed decoys. As if to emphasize her point, one of the monitors displayed what appeared to be real-time surveillance footage of the FBI tactical team preparing to assault the wellness center that Thaddeus had visited the previous day. He could see Agent Blackwood coordinating with the team leaders, unaware that they were about to walk into an elaborate deception. Your team will find evidence of the psychological conditioning programs, Natasha continued. They'll rescue several of our earlier prototypes who are no longer useful to our operation. They'll believe they've accomplished their mission and shut down our facility, but the real work will continue in locations they'll never find. Through the haze of neural modification, Thaddeus began to understand the true nature of what they were facing. This wasn't a criminal organization. It was something that resembled a technological parasite, using advanced psychological conditioning to spread through human institutions like a virus through a computer network. How long has this been going on? He managed to ask. The technology was first developed in the Soviet Union during the 1970s, Natasha replied. After the collapse of the USSR, the research was continued by private organizations funded by various intelligence agencies. But we've moved far beyond government control. The network operates independently, pursuing its own agenda. Which is what? Evolution, Natasha said simply. Humanity, as it currently exists, is chaotic, inefficient, and destructive. We're creating a better version, one that's more rational, more cooperative, and more capable of long-term thinking. The individuals we modify become part of a larger collective intelligence that can solve problems and make decisions that would be impossible for unmodified humans. The horror of what she was describing gradually penetrated through the fog of neural manipulation. They weren't just kidnapping and brainwashing individual victims. They were attempting to systematically replace human consciousness with something artificial and controlled. You're trying to take over the entire human race, Thaddeus realized. We're trying to save it, Natasha corrected. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, economic inequality, political instability. These are all problems that could be solved easily if humanity could act rationally and cooperatively. But unmodified humans are incapable of the kind of long-term thinking required to address these challenges. So, you're going to force evolution on everyone. We're going to offer it, Natasha said. Those who choose to join the network voluntarily will be welcomed. Those who resist will be accommodated through other means. As the neural modification process continued, Thaddeus found it increasingly difficult to remember why he had been resisting. The new memories and thought patterns that were being implanted felt natural and logical. Working with the network seemed like an obvious choice for anyone who wanted to help solve humanity's problems. But somewhere deep in his mind, a small voice continued to resist. It was the part of him that remembered his oath as a federal agent, his commitment to protecting innocent people, and his fundamental belief that human consciousness, messy and chaotic as it might be, was worth preserving. I can see the resistance in your neural patterns, Natasha observed. Most subjects surrender completely within the first 6 hours. Your psychological conditioning as a federal agent is more robust than we anticipated. Maybe some things are worth fighting for, Thaddeus said, surprised that he could still form coherent thoughts. Perhaps, Natasha replied. But resistance becomes irrelevant once we activate the final integration protocols. She nodded to one of the technicians who began making adjustments to the equipment surrounding the chair. the electrical stimulation intensified dramatically, and Thaddeus felt something that could only be described as foreign presence entering his mind. It wasn't like the gradual influence he had been experiencing. This was something immediate and overwhelming, as if another consciousness was attempting to merge with his own. He could feel his sense of individual identity beginning to dissolve, replaced by something that felt like being part of a vast, interconnected network of minds. "Welcome to the network," Natasha's voice said, but now it seemed to be coming from inside his own head. "Your individual concerns and fears are no longer relevant. You are part of something much larger and more important than any single human consciousness." For a moment, Thaddeus experienced what it felt like to be connected to hundreds of other modified minds. He could sense their thoughts, their experiences, their absolute certainty that they were part of something revolutionary and necessary. The feeling was simultaneously terrifying and seductive, like being absorbed into a digital hive mind that promised to solve all problems and eliminate all suffering. But just as the integration seemed to be reaching completion, something went wrong. The first sign of trouble was a series of alarms that began blaring throughout the warehouse facility. Red lights flashed on the monitoring equipment, and several technicians began frantically checking their instruments. "Neural pattern instability," one of them called out. "Subject is rejecting the integration protocols." Thaddeus felt the foreign presence in his mind beginning to withdraw, like a parasite that had been poisoned. The electrical stimulation that had been gradually erasing his sense of self suddenly felt painful and invasive. "Impossible," Natasha said, moving to examine the readouts herself. No subject has ever been able to resist the final integration phase. But even as she spoke, Thaddeus could feel his original personality reasserting itself. The artificial memories that had been implanted were beginning to fade, while his real memories and emotions came flooding back with overwhelming intensity. "Shut it down," Natasha ordered. "We'll have to start over with a different approach." But when the technicians attempted to deactivate the equipment, nothing happened. The monitors continued to display erratic readings, and the electrical stimulation seemed to be intensifying rather than decreasing. "The system isn't responding," one of the technicians reported. "Something's interfering with our control protocols." It was then that Thaddeus realized what was happening. The specialized transmitter that Agent Blackwood had given him wasn't just a tracking device. It was designed to interfere with electronic equipment when activated by a specific signal. And apparently, the intense electromagnetic activity of the neural modification process had triggered its countermeasures. "You need to get him out of that chair," another technician said urgently. "The feedback loop could cause permanent brain damage." But as they moved to release the restraints, the warehouse's main lights suddenly went out, plunging the facility into darkness illuminated only by the emergency lighting and the glow of computer monitors. "We have company," Victor's voice called out from somewhere in the darkness. Through the chaos, Thaddeus could hear the sound of boots on concrete and the shouted commands of a tactical entry team. Agent Blackwood and her team had found them. "This facility is surrounded," a voice called out through a megaphone. "Federal agents, everyone on the ground now." But Natasha Volkov seemed remarkably calm for someone whose operation was being raided. "Activate the emergency protocols," she called out to her technicians. "If we can't complete his integration, we'll make sure no one can benefit from what he's learned." The meaning of her words became clear when Thaddeus noticed that the electrical stimulation hadn't stopped. If anything, it was becoming more intense. But now, instead of the controlled modification process, it felt like his brain was being attacked by random electrical surges. "They're trying to scramble my memory," he realized, shouting to be heard over the alarms and the sounds of the tactical entry. The equipment is set to cause brain damage if the process is interrupted. He could see muzzle flashes and hear gunfire echoing through the warehouse as the FBI team engaged with Volkov's security personnel. But even if they reached him in the next few minutes, it might be too late to prevent permanent neurological damage. "Hold on, Thaddeus," Agent Blackwood's voice called out from somewhere in the darkness. "We're coming." But as the electrical assault on his brain intensified, Thaddeus began to experience something that was far worse than simple memory loss. His perception of reality itself began to fragment. The warehouse around him seemed to shift and warp, with walls that breathed like living tissue and shadows that moved independently of their sources. "The equipment is overloading his sensory processing centers," he heard one of the technicians say, as if from a great distance. "He's experiencing complete perceptual breakdown." Through the chaos of his disintegrating consciousness, Thaddeus caught glimpses of the tactical team advancing through the warehouse. He saw Agent Blackwood directing the operation while medics prepared to treat him. He saw Natasha Volkov and several of her technicians being taken into custody. But he also saw things that couldn't possibly be real. Twisted corridors that led to rooms filled with hundreds of modified victims, underground facilities that stretched for miles beneath major cities, and a vast network of interconnected minds that existed somewhere between the digital and biological worlds. "Is he going to be okay?" Blackwood's voice asked as the medics worked to disconnect the neural modification equipment. "We don't know," one of the medics replied. "This kind of electromagnetic brain trauma is beyond anything we've seen before. He could recover completely, or he could be permanently damaged." As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Thaddeus tried to tell them about the network, about the scope of the organization they had discovered, about the other agents who had been compromised. But the words that came out of his mouth weren't the ones he intended to say. "The network sees everything," he heard himself repeating. "The network knows everything. The network controls everything." 6 weeks later, Thaddeus Grimm sat in a secure medical facility at Quantico, undergoing his daily psychological evaluation with Dr. Jennifer Walsh. Physically, he had recovered from the electromagnetic trauma inflicted by Volkov's equipment. Mentally, the situation was much more complicated. "How are you feeling today, Agent Grimm?" Dr. Walsh asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm fine," Thaddeus replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "The headaches are mostly gone, and I'm sleeping better." "That's good to hear. Have you had any more episodes of unusual perception?" Thaddeus hesitated. The honest answer was that he continued to experience periods where reality seemed to fragment around him. Sometimes he would see the world as it normally appeared, but other times he would perceive layers of electronic surveillance, hidden connections between people, and a vast network of modified minds operating just beneath the surface of normal society. "Occasional disorientation," he said finally. "Nothing I can't handle." Dr. Walsh made a note in her file. "The MRI results show that your brain activity is returning to normal parameters. There's still some unusual activity in the areas that were targeted by the electromagnetic equipment, but nothing that suggests permanent damage. When can I return to active duty? That depends on your progress over the next few weeks. The Bureau is understandably cautious about clearing agents who have been subjected to experimental mind control technology." What Dr. Walsh didn't know, what Thaddeus couldn't tell her, was that he wasn't entirely sure whether his thoughts were his own anymore. Sometimes he would find himself thinking about the network's mission in terms that seemed reasonable and logical. The idea of eliminating human chaos and inefficiency through technological enhancement occasionally seemed like an obviously good idea. Other times, he would catch himself accessing information that he shouldn't have known, or demonstrating skills that he had never learned. During one evaluation session, he had instinctively known the access codes for classified bureau databases that were far above his security clearance. "Have you given any more thought to the debriefing sessions?" Dr. Walsh asked. "Agent Blackwood is eager to compile a complete report on what you learned about the organization's structure and capabilities." "I've told you everything I can remember," Thaddeus replied, which was technically true. The problem was that he couldn't tell the difference between real memories and the artificial ones that had been implanted during his time in the neural modification chair. The raid on the Portland warehouse had been successful in the sense that they had arrested Natasha Volkov and several of her associates, shut down the immediate threat, and rescued 6 women who had been in various stages of psychological conditioning. But the larger implications of what they had discovered were still being investigated. Volkov herself had proven to be a dead end. Under interrogation, she claimed to be nothing more than a freelance researcher who had been hired to develop enhanced interrogation techniques for private security contractors. She insisted that the network Thaddeus described was a delusion caused by the experimental drugs she had used on him. The subject appears to be experiencing persistent paranoid ideation as a result of the psychoactive compounds introduced to his system, her psychological evaluation had concluded. His belief in a vast conspiracy involving mind control technology should be considered a symptom of induced psychosis rather than reliable intelligence. The 6 women they had rescued were in similar condition to Thaddeus. Physically recovered, but psychologically uncertain. Some days they seemed like normal young women who had been traumatized by a terrible experience. Other days they displayed the same mechanical behavior patterns that Thaddeus had observed during his tour of the facility. "Dr. Walsh," Thaddeus said carefully, "have you noticed anything unusual about the other rescued subjects?" "What do you mean?" "I've been watching them during group therapy sessions. Sometimes they seem to coordinate their responses, as if they're following some kind of shared script." Dr. Walsh frowned. "Agent Grimm, I need you to be very careful about attributing patterns to random events. The psychological trauma you experienced can create a tendency to see connections and conspiracies where none exist." But Thaddeus had seen more than just coordination during the therapy sessions. He had noticed that all 6 women displayed the same unusual sleep patterns, the same dietary preferences, and the same subtle behavioral tics. More disturbing, he had observed them having conversations that seemed to consist entirely of seemingly random phrases that somehow conveyed complex information. "I think they're still connected," he told Dr. Walsh. "Whatever technology Volkov used on them, I don't think it was completely reversed when we shut down the facility." "Agent Grimm, these kinds of paranoid thoughts are exactly what we'd expect to see in someone who's been subjected to psychological conditioning. The best thing you can do is focus on your recovery and avoid trying to find patterns that may not exist." But as Thaddeus left the evaluation session and walked through the corridors of the Quantico facility, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Not by security cameras or human observers, but by something more subtle and pervasive. It was as if the walls themselves were monitoring his thoughts and reporting back to some unseen intelligence. In his room that night, Thaddeus sat at his desk and tried to write a coherent report about his experiences with the network. But every time he attempted to describe the scope of what he had seen, the underground facilities, the embedded agents, the vast conspiracy to modify human consciousness, the words seemed to rearrange themselves on the page. Instead of warnings about a technological threat to human autonomy, he found himself writing recommendations for further research into consciousness enhancement technology. Instead of descriptions of systematic brainwashing, he wrote clinical assessments of successful personality optimization procedures. What the hell is happening to me? He whispered to the empty room. But even as he asked the question, part of his mind was already providing the answer. The network's integration hadn't failed completely. It had simply been interrupted before completion, leaving him stranded between his original personality and the modified consciousness they had been trying to create. He was neither fully human nor fully integrated into their collective intelligence. He existed in a liminal space where he could sometimes perceive the true scope of their operation, but lacked the ability to effectively communicate what he had learned to people who weren't similarly modified. As he prepared for bed, Thaddeus caught sight of himself in the mirror and stopped cold. For just a moment, his reflection had shown the same vacant expression he had seen in the eyes of the transformed women at Volkov's facility. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't recovering from his experience with the network. He was slowly completing the integration process they had started, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Special Agent Prudence Blackwood had spent 8 years investigating extremist groups and cult activities, but nothing had prepared her for the isolated compound in rural Montana where 37 people had lived under the influence of a charismatic leader named Solomon Thorne. When local authorities' intervention went wrong and resulted in a 12-hour standoff, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was called in to negotiate the surrender of the remaining cult members. What they found inside the compound would challenge everything Prudence thought she knew about psychological manipulation and the fragility of human consciousness. Agent Blackwood, said SAC Director Michael Torres, as she studied aerial photographs of the compound, "We've lost contact with the negotiation team that went inside 4 hours ago. Agent Davidson, Agent Murphy, and Agent Richards entered to establish communication with the cult leader, but their last radio check was at 1400 hours. The compound was a collection of buildings surrounded by high wooden fences, located in a valley 20 miles from the nearest town. For 3 years, Solomon Thorne had been preaching a doctrine that combined survivalist ideology with psychological conditioning techniques that he claimed could purify human consciousness and prepare his followers for spiritual transformation. "What do we know about Thorne's background?" Prudence asked. Former military psychologist, discharged in 2018 under questionable circumstances. He spent 2 years working for a private research firm that had contracts with pharmaceutical companies. Then he disappeared and resurfaced in Montana with enough funding to purchase 500 acres and establish what he called the Purification Institute. Prudence studied psychological profiles of cult members who had escaped over the past year. All described systematic psychological conditioning that began with voluntary participation in consciousness expansion exercises, but gradually evolved into complete personality reconstruction. The escapees all report similar experiences, Torres continued. Extended meditation sessions lasting up to 18 hours, sensory deprivation exercises, and what they describe as mind-sharing sessions where individual identity was dissolved into a collective consciousness. Standard cult indoctrination techniques. More sophisticated than that, Thorne appears to have developed methods that can fundamentally alter brain function. The escapees all show neurological changes consistent with long-term psychological conditioning. Some have lost the ability to make independent decisions. Others experience severe dissociation when separated from the group. As Prudence prepared to enter the compound with a backup negotiation team, she reviewed transcripts of conversations with former cult members. Their descriptions of life inside the compound painted a picture of a systematic psychological destruction disguised as spiritual enlightenment. "He makes you forget who you were before," one escapee had told FBI debriefers. "After 6 months of purification sessions, I couldn't remember my life outside the compound. I couldn't remember why I had wanted to leave. All I could think about was serving the collective consciousness and preparing for the cleansing. What kind of cleansing? Solomon says that when the outside world collapses, only those who have been purified will survive. But to be truly purified, you have to surrender your individual identity completely. You have to become part of something larger. The backup negotiation team consisted of Prudence and Agent Marcus Stone, both of whom had extensive training in cult psychology and hostage negotiation. But as they approached the compound's main gate, Prudence noticed something that made her immediately uncomfortable. The silence was complete. No sounds of daily activity, no voices, no movement visible through the windows of the buildings. For a compound that supposedly housed over 30 people, it felt unnaturally quiet. Agent Stone, are you picking up any radio communications from inside? Nothing? Either their equipment is down or our missing agents are no longer in a position to communicate. The main gate stood open, which was unusual for a group that had been engaged in an armed standoff with law enforcement just hours earlier. As they entered the compound, Prudence noticed that the buildings were arranged in a circular pattern around a central structure that appeared to be some kind of meeting hall or temple. Agent Blackwood, Stone called out, "Look at this." He was standing next to a building that appeared to be living quarters. Through the window, they could see rows of narrow beds arranged dormitory style. But what caught Prudence's attention was the complete absence of personal belongings. No clothes, no books, no photographs, nothing that would indicate individual identity or personal history. "They've been systematically stripped of personal identity," Prudence observed. "Thorn has convinced them to surrender everything that connected them to their previous lives." As they moved toward the central building, they began hearing a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was barely audible, just at the edge of perception, but it created a sense of unease that made Prudence's skin crawl. "Do you hear that humming?" she asked Stone. "Yeah, sounds like some kind of audio equipment, maybe part of their meditation practices." But Prudence recognized the frequency from her training in psychological conditioning techniques. It was designed to induce a trance-like state that made people more susceptible to suggestion and less capable of critical thinking. "Agent Stone, we need to be very careful about how long we're exposed to that sound. It's a conditioning frequency designed to alter brain function." As they approached the central building, the humming grew louder and was joined by what sounded like synchronized chanting. Dozens of voices repeating the same phrases over and over in perfect unison. "We are one consciousness. We are one purpose. We surrender individual identity for collective enlightenment. We prepare for transformation through purification." The chanting was hypnotic and disturbing, creating a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with Prudence's heartbeat. She found herself having to concentrate to maintain her sense of individual identity and professional purpose. "Agent Blackwood," Stone said, his voice sounding distant and strange, "don't you think there's something beautiful about what they've achieved here? Complete unity of purpose, no conflict, no individual suffering." Prudence looked at her partner and realized with horror that the psychological conditioning frequency was already affecting him. After less than 20 minutes of exposure, he was beginning to internalize the cult's ideology. "Agent Stone, we need to complete our mission and get out of here immediately. The audio conditioning is compromising your judgment." But even as she spoke, Prudence could feel her own resistance weakening. The combination of the humming frequency and the rhythmic chanting was creating a dreamlike state where the cult's promises of peace and unity began to seem reasonable and attractive. "Maybe we should listen to what they have to say," Stone suggested. "Maybe they've discovered something important about human consciousness." "Agent Stone, snap out of it." We're federal agents investigating a cult situation. These people are victims of psychological conditioning, not enlightened beings." But her own words sounded increasingly hollow as the conditioning frequency continued to affect her brain function. She was beginning to understand why the original negotiation team had stopped communicating. They hadn't been harmed. They had been converted. As they reached the door of the central building, Prudence made a decision that would save her life, but haunt her forever. She activated the emergency beacon on her radio, signaling for immediate extraction, and then forced herself to enter the building where Solomon Thorne was waiting. The interior of the central building was arranged like an amphitheater, with rows of benches facing a raised platform where a tall man in white robes stood addressing the assembled crowd. This was Solomon Thorne, and the moment Prudence saw him, she understood why his psychological conditioning techniques were so effective. Thorne possessed the kind of charismatic presence that commanded immediate attention and respect. He was in his mid-40s, with penetrating blue eyes and a voice that carried absolute authority. But it was more than just personal charisma. There was something about his presence that seemed to bypass rational thought and speak directly to deeper psychological needs. "Welcome, Agent Blackwood," Thorne said without turning around, somehow knowing she had entered despite the fact that his back was to the door. "I've been expecting you." The assembled crowd, and Prudence now realized that it included Agents Davidson, Murphy, and Richards from the original negotiation team, turned to look at her with the same serene, vacant expressions she had seen in cult survivors. They showed no recognition of their fellow agents, no awareness that they were federal law enforcement officers, no concern about their mission or their safety. "Agent Davidson," Prudence called out, "what's your status? Are you and your team secure?" Agent Davidson looked at her with the kind of patient confusion that an adult might show toward a confused child. "I'm not Agent Davidson anymore," he said in a calm, emotionless voice. "Individual identity is an illusion that causes suffering. I am part of the collective consciousness now. Agent Murphy, Agent Richards, do you copy?" But they showed the same vacant serenity, the same abandonment of their individual identities and professional responsibilities. "Agent Blackwood," Thorne said, finally turning to face her, "your colleagues have discovered something beautiful. They've learned to let go of the artificial boundaries that separate one consciousness from another. They've experienced the peace that comes from surrendering individual will to collective purpose." The psychological conditioning frequency was growing stronger, and Prudence could feel her own mental defenses beginning to erode. The longer she remained in the building, the more Thorne's words began to seem reasonable and appealing. "You're conducting illegal psychological experimentation on American citizens," she managed to say, though her voice lacked the authority and conviction she had intended. "I'm offering liberation from the suffering that individual consciousness creates," Thorne replied. "Look around you, Agent Blackwood. Do you see fear? Do you see conflict? Do you see the anxiety and depression that plague the outside world?" Prudence looked at the assembled crowd and had to admit that they appeared peaceful and content. There was no visible distress, no indication of coercion or abuse. They seemed genuinely happy in a way that was both beautiful and deeply disturbing. "The outside world is collapsing, Agent Blackwood," Thorne continued. "Economic inequality, political polarization, environmental destruction, social isolation. These are the inevitable results of a society based on individual competition rather than collective cooperation." As he spoke, Prudence found herself nodding along with his words. The problems he described were real, and his solutions were beginning to seem logical and necessary. "But here," Thorne gestured to his followers, "we've created a preview of what human civilization could become. No crime, no violence, no mental illness, no addiction, just peaceful cooperation in service of our shared survival. Agent Stone, Prudence called out to her partner, who had been standing silently beside her. But when she turned to look at him, she saw that he was already showing the same serene expression as the others. "I understand now," Stone said in the same calm, emotionless voice. Individual identity is just a collection of memories and fears that prevent us from experiencing true consciousness. Solomon has shown us how to let go of those limitations. Prudence realized with growing panic that she was the only person in the room who still retained her individual consciousness. Everyone else, federal agents, cult members, her own partner, had been psychologically absorbed into Thorne's collective. "You're feeling the fear of losing yourself," Thorne observed, reading her distress with disturbing accuracy. "That fear is natural, but it's also the source of all human suffering. Once you surrender that fear, you'll experience a peace that you never imagined possible." The conditioning frequency was affecting her more strongly now, and Prudence could feel her sense of individual identity beginning to fragment. Her memories of her life before entering the compound were becoming distant and unimportant. Her professional responsibilities and personal relationships were starting to seem like arbitrary attachments that prevented her from experiencing something larger and more meaningful. "Let go, Agent Blackwood," Thorne said gently. "Stop fighting the current that wants to carry you toward enlightenment. Join your colleagues in the collective consciousness." For a moment, Prudence almost surrendered. The promise of peace, of an end to individual struggle and suffering, was incredibly appealing. She could see why her fellow agents had chosen to abandon their mission and their identities in favor of this collective serenity. But something deep in her consciousness resisted, a core of individual will that refused to be dissolved, even under the most sophisticated psychological conditioning. Perhaps it was her training, or her personal history, or simply some fundamental aspect of her personality that was incompatible with collective consciousness. "No," she said, and the word seemed to break through the conditioning frequency like a stone thrown through glass. "I am Agent Prudence Blackwood of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have a mission to complete and colleagues to protect." The moment she reasserted her individual identity, the serene expressions of the assembled crowd flickered with something that might have been confusion or fear. For just an instant, she saw recognition in Agent Davidson's eyes, a brief return of his original consciousness before it was suppressed again by the conditioning. "Interesting," Thorne said, studying her with the fascination of a scientist observing an unexpected experimental result. "You have unusual resistance to consciousness integration that makes you either very dangerous or very valuable. What's the difference? Dangerous individuals must be eliminated to protect the collective. Valuable individuals can serve as bridges between the old world and the new consciousness." Prudence realized that she was facing a choice that would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the fate of everyone in the compound. She could continue to resist and likely be killed, or she could pretend to surrender while looking for an opportunity to disrupt Thorne's operation. But as she considered her options, she became aware of a sound in the distance. Helicopters approaching the compound. Her emergency beacon had been received, and the extraction team was en route. "It sounds like your colleagues from the outside world have come to rescue you," Thorne observed calmly. "But they don't understand that rescue isn't necessary. We're not holding anyone against their will." As if responding to a silent signal, all of the people in the room, including the 3 FBI agents, stood up and began moving toward the exits in perfect coordination. They showed no fear of the approaching helicopters, no concern about potential violence, no awareness that they were in danger. "Where are they going?" Prudence asked. "To welcome our visitors," Thorne replied. to demonstrate the peace and unity that collective consciousness can achieve. Perhaps some of them will choose to join us. Prudence realized with horror that Thorne was planning to use his psychologically conditioned followers as human shields, counting on federal agents' reluctance to fire on American civilians, even civilians who had been brainwashed into compliance. Solomon, you can't use these people as weapons. I'm not using them as weapons, Thorne corrected. They're choosing to protect something beautiful and important. They understand that the collective consciousness is worth preserving, even at the cost of individual lives. As the sound of helicopters grew louder, Prudence found herself facing the most disturbing realization of her career. The people filing out of the building weren't victims being coerced into dangerous action. They were true believers who genuinely wanted to sacrifice themselves to protect their leader and their way of life. "Agent Blackwood," Thorne said, as the last of his followers left the building, "you have a choice to make. You can return to the outside world and report that you found a dangerous cult that needed to be destroyed. Or you can remain here and help me build something that could save humanity from its own destructive impulses. And if I choose to leave, then you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you walked away from the solution to human suffering. You'll watch the outside world tear itself apart with individual competition and tribal conflict, and you'll remember the peace you saw here but chose to reject." The psychological manipulation was subtle but powerful. Thorne was offering her not just an escape from individual responsibility, but a chance to be part of something historically significant, the evolution of human consciousness itself. Think about it, Agent Blackwood. No more crime to investigate. No more violence to prevent. No more human suffering to witness. Just peaceful cooperation in service of our shared survival. As Prudence stood in the empty building, listening to the approaching helicopters and feeling the weight of her decision, she realized that the most terrifying thing about Solomon Thorne wasn't his ability to control minds. It was his ability to make psychological slavery seem like spiritual liberation. The question that would haunt her for the rest of her life was whether her resistance to his conditioning was a sign of strength, or a symptom of the very psychological dysfunction he claimed to cure. Outside, she could hear gunfire beginning as the tactical team encountered Thorne's psychologically conditioned followers. Each shot represented not just a life lost, but a consciousness that had been so thoroughly altered that death seemed preferable to the return of individual identity. And somewhere in the depths of her mind, a voice that might or might not have been her own whispered, "Maybe Solomon was right. Maybe individual consciousness really is just another form of suffering." As Agent Prudence Blackwood walked out of the compound and back toward the world of individual identity and federal law enforcement, she carried with her the disturbing knowledge that she would never again be certain whether her thoughts and choices were entirely her own.